Hey guys. Tonight we're slipping into something a little softer than your usual late-night doom-scrolling. Instead of spinning through notifications, you're stepping into a quiet corridor where candle flames tremble like they're afraid of their own shadows. You're here to wander through the untold lives of the holy saints, those figures you've probably heard of in passing. Usually portrayed with immaculate halos and zero personality flaws. Spoiler: real life wasn't nearly that tidy. And if you were teleported into their daily routines, you probably wouldn't survive a single afternoon. The food alone would take you out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I love imagining these stories floating across time zones like wandering pilgrims. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not sure when the corridor begins. One moment you're surrounded by your usual bedroom clutter. And the next, your feet are brushing across stone so old it practically complains under your weight. You follow the faint glow of candles that seem to form a path long before you consciously choose a direction. The air tastes dusty, like parchment stored too close to incense. And the ceiling arches above you as though the whole place were built to remind you how small you are. If modern life often feels big and loud, this feels like slipping into a pocket universe that someone stitched together by hand. A soft creak echoes from ahead, and you drift toward it, half curious, half certain you're about to meet your sleep paralysis demon. But instead, you step into a scriptorium, one of those medieval writing rooms you've probably seen in documentaries where monks copy texts for hours. Except here, the desks are empty, the windows shuttered, and only one candle remains lit. The flame bends toward you, almost greeting you, like a dog wagging its tail in candle form. You move closer and spot something etched onto the desk. A series of faint initials. It looks like someone carved them in a hurry, maybe while no one was looking. The letters are unfamiliar, but the act feels oddly human, like the ancient equivalent of writing, "I was here," on a bathroom stall. And as you brush your fingers across them, a gentle pressure fills the room. As if someone, or something, has just stepped inside your bubble of awareness. When you turn, he's already there, the faint silhouette of a monk. Or maybe a saint, because the air around him glimmers just slightly. Like heat rising off asphalt. He doesn't look at you directly, instead. He busies himself with rolling up a manuscript you swear wasn't on the desk 2 seconds ago. Typical supernatural guest behavior. No hello. No eye contact. Just immediate multitasking. You shift your weight and try to make sense of him. His robe drapes heavily, made from scratchy material you can practically feel on your own skin. His hands, surprisingly delicate, move with a precision you don't often see outside surgeons and people who build tiny ship models for fun. When he finally looks up, his expression is calm, ancient calm, the kind you don't get from meditation apps, no matter how many soothing whale sounds they pump into your playlist. He gestures for you to follow him, no words. Just a tilt of the head that's somehow authoritative and polite at the same time. You trail behind him into a larger hall, where the chill deepens and faint murals line the walls. Some are familiar scenes, early Christian gatherings, desert wanderers, faint halos on figures who look more exhausted than divine. But others are stranger. There's one that shows a saint holding a bowl of ashes. Another kneeling beside a well with a rope wrapped around his wrists. And yet another standing before a crowd while a single dove perches stubbornly on his shoulder. You pause at that last one, partly because the dove looks like it's judging everyone in the room. The monk notices your interest and softly touches the mural. Right on the dove's tiny head. They don't paint the noise, he says, his voice low and dusty. The dove never stopped cooing. Loudly. During everything. The idea of a saint performing solemn acts with a noisy bird squawking in his ear makes you smile. It's the first joke of the night. Courtesy of a man who lived hundreds of years before the invention of comedy podcasts. Nice. The monk continues walking, and as you follow, he shares bits of the story, how that particular saint, a once wealthy man, abandoned every possession after witnessing a famine that devastated his city. You feel the heaviness of that choice. One moment he had silk, servants, and shaded courtyards, the next. He lived on bread so coarse it probably doubled as exfoliant. The famine he responded to was real, a historical event known across several regions. One that reshaped trade routes and toppled the stability of entire communities. But then the monk mentions something you've never heard before. That the saint was rumored to have donated not just his wealth, but also a personal collection of mathematical instruments, compasses, measuring rods, unique tools for studying the stars, objects uncommon for holy men of his era. Some accounts claim he used them to track celestial movements, trying to predict when the next famine might strike so cities could prepare. Historians still debate whether he actually owned such instruments. The monk murmurs. Some say it was just legend, a story told by admirers who wanted to make him sound wiser. Others think he may have known more about the sky than priests were expected to. You press your palm to the mural, feeling a roughness that makes the scene more real. In the flicker of candlelight, the shadows seem to move, like the figures in the painting might step out and stretch their stiff limbs at any moment. You wander deeper into the hall, and with every step, the candlelight seems to remember where you need it. The monk points toward a small alcove holding an ancient bowl, the kind used in monastic rituals. Except this one is charred black. He explains that the saint sometimes mixed burnt herbs into it as part of a purification rite. Not the usual incense, something rarer, fragrant and sharp, a plant now extinct, collected only in high mountains and said to bloom once every 7 years. The kind of detailed textbooks conveniently skip. Another joke slips into your thoughts. If modern influencers had access to a once-in-7 years sacred herb, you'd be seeing sponsored content about it non-stop. Turn your life around with saint-grade aromatic renewal powder, link in bio. You follow the monk until he stops before a narrow door. When he pushes it open, a draft curls around your ankles. The room beyond is circular, small, almost womb-like, lit only by a single lantern hanging on a chain. It smells like wax, parchment, and quiet resolution. The monk sets the scroll down on a pedestal, smoothing it with the care of someone tucking in a child for sleep. This is where he wrote. The monk says, not the teachings everyone knows. The private thoughts he never meant for others. You lean closer, Feeling the weight of centuries press in, the ink on the parchment glistens faintly. As if still drying, you read lines about fear, doubt, exhaustion, the confessions of a man who loved silence but lived in a world that rarely offered it. One sentence stands out: even holiness is lonely. Another joke nudges you: relatable. Even your phone battery dies less dramatically than this. But you soften as the lantern flickers, and the air feels warm despite the stone walls. You realize you're holding a fragment of someone who lived through hunger, devotion, arguments, famine forecasts, and a clingy dove. Not a legend, a person, one whose story cracked open just for you tonight. And as the monk fades back into the shadows, you're left with the quiet understanding that you've only stepped through the first doorway, one whisper among many waiting in this vast, ancient hush. You leave the circular room with its trembling lantern, carrying the faint echo of the saint's private confession in the back of your mind. Even holiness is lonely. It clings to you like the smell of old parchment, following you into the hall where the candles seem to burn a little more steadily now, as if acknowledging you've passed some kind of silent entrance exam. You take a slow breath, noticing how the air has changed. Before, it felt like dust whispering across your lungs. Now it feels like anticipation. The kind that builds before a story tilts into something unexpected. A new corridor waits for you, narrower than the first, lined with tall wooden niches. Most are empty, but a few are filled with objects wrapped in faded cloth. The fabric looks brittle enough to crumble if you so much as sneeze in its direction. You approach one bundle and gently peel back a corner. Beneath the cloth is a small, carved box made from dark cedar. Its design is surprisingly elegant, delicate patterns curling across the lid like vines. You trace the carvings and realize they form a stylized Ouroboros, a serpent eating its own tail. Not a common symbol for early Christian saints. But then again, these stories specialize in the things not common. Before you can lift the lid, a soft voice hums behind you. It's the same monk as before, though now he looks different, less transparent, more present, like someone's turned up the brightness on him slightly. His robe sways as though stirred by a breeze you don't feel. That box, he says, belonged to a man who refused gold. You let the fabric fall back into place and turn toward him. Curious, the monk gestures for you to follow him down the corridor. And you comply, the cedar box lingering in your mind like an unopened notification, mysterious, mildly tempting, probably important. You enter a chamber larger than the previous ones. A long stone table stretches across its center, and on it lies an array of small objects, dusty, worn, but displayed with a reverence that suggests their stories matter far more than their appearance. The monk places his hand over one item in particular, a narrow strip of metal, twisted and tarnished. This, he says, is what remains of a bracelet once offered to the saint who refused gold. You lean closer, wondering how something so humble could cause an entire story to survive centuries. The bracelet looks like it's been through multiple lifetimes. And it probably has. The monk continues, his voice soft as candle smoke. He was offered wealth for negotiating peace between two feuding noble families. A common historical event, recorded in several chronicles. Their conflict nearly sparked a regional war, and many feared the worst. But he convinced both sides to sit together, to speak instead of bleed. The monk pauses. For his efforts, they offered him gold, much of it. You picture the scene, a large hall. Nervous nobles waiting to lash out at the slightest provocation. A holy man stepping into the middle like a referee in sandals. You imagine him pressing his palms together, sighing quietly while thinking, I swear, if I have to listen to one more speech about honor. He refused every coin, the monk says, but they begged him to accept at least one gift. Something symbolic, so they forged this bracelet from scraps of their combined treasures. You lift the metal strip, surprised by its surprising weight. It's cool to the touch, textured with dents and imperfections. Not a luxury item at all, more like a physical compromise. He wore it for exactly 1 day. The monk adds, before giving it away to a beggar at the monastery gate. You blink, that tracks. You mumble, and the monk actually smiles. You place the bracelet back on the table and drift toward the far wall, where a mural has begun to reveal itself. It shows a scene of the negotiation. 2 families seated on opposite sides of a hall. Steam practically rising from their anger. The saint stands between them, hand raised, posture calm. What catches your attention is the small detail in the corner. A tiny golden bowl filled with water. That bowl, the monk says, noticing your focus, held a mixture of salt and crushed myrrh. A tradition for purification. It's rarely mentioned because it was seen as a ritual unfit for political proceedings. You run your finger lightly across the painted surface. This tiny bowl, barely noticeable, had been part of the event, yet disappeared from almost every version of the story. Historians still debate whether he actually used the ritual during the negotiation. The monk whispers. Some claim it was just symbolic. Others believe he used the scent to calm the families. Myrrh has that effect. After all, you nod slowly. The idea of calming furious nobles with aromatherapy is both hilarious and completely believable. You imagine him walking into the hall like, okay, let's all take a deep breath and try not to stab each other today. You move away from the mural and find a small alcove filled with scraps of parchment. Some contain scribbled notes in hurried handwriting. One detail jumps out at you. A list of grievances. Written twice. Once in an elegant script. Once in a messy one. When you point to it, the monk explains. He wrote them down for both families, restructuring their arguments so they mirrored each other. He wanted them to see how alike their complaints were. You chuckle softly. The medieval version of, you're literally arguing the same thing. The monk inclines his head. He believed conflict often comes from people refusing to recognize themselves in the other. As you stand there, the room feels warmer, as if the saint's stubborn refusal of gold has left a residue of quiet integrity in the air. The bracelet, the painted bowl, the double-written grievances, all fragments of a story that textbooks reduce to a single line. He rejected wealth. But here, in this quiet chamber, you see the tenderness beneath the choice. He wasn't trying to be dramatic, he was trying to be precise. To refuse greed so he could keep his motives clean. You wandered toward the back of the room, where an open window lets in a faint draft. Outside, the night slips past like ink poured onto velvet. The moon hangs low, heavy, as if listening. The monk stands beside you. arms folded within his sleeves. His refusal changed more than those families. He says, "It reminded the city that peace cannot be bought. It must be chosen." You close your eyes briefly, feeling the cool air brush your skin. It smells faintly of wood smoke and distant water. When you open them again, you notice something new: a thin trail of gold dust on the floor. Almost too fine to see. It leads toward another corridor, one shrouded in deeper shadow. The monk gestures toward it. "There are more stories waiting," he murmurs, "and each one is a step further from the world you know." You feel your pulse slow, your breath deepen, as though your body is settling into this unfolding nocturnal pilgrimage. The bracelet's story lingers in your mind, a small weight of integrity and almost stubborn humility. You take your first step into the next corridor. You follow the thin line of gold dust as it threads deeper into the monastery's unseen heart. Each step seems to hush the world a little more, as though sound itself is becoming shy. The corridor narrows, the ceiling dips, and the flickering light begins to lean toward you again, almost companionably. Like it has decided you're not entirely hopeless at navigating ancient hallways. Eventually the gold trail fades, replaced by a soft glow seeping from an open archway ahead. You step through and immediately feel the shift in the air. It's warmer here, touched by the faint scent of dry grass, sun-baked stone, and something smoky that reminds you of old campfires. The ground itself seems lighter under your feet, the way dream sand moves before you notice you're dreaming. Then the walls dissolve. Not literally, but the effect is startling enough that you blink twice. The stone gives way to a wide expanse of open desert, pale dunes stretching into a horizon that looks like it's been carved by ancient wind. The sun hangs low, swollen and gold, shedding heat that wraps around you like a wool blanket straight from the dryer. A tiny breeze lifts the hair at your temples, carrying the distant cry of a lone desert bird. The monk stands beside you again, though you're not sure when he appeared. "This is where he walked," he says, voice low, "the hermit of visions." You take in the landscape, thinking that hermit of visions sounds like someone who owns too many crystals and refuses to water their plants. But the silence of the place steals your urge to joke out loud. It's too vast, too solemn. The ground shifts slightly as you follow a faint path leading across the dunes. Footprints, several sets, trail ahead. Some older, some fresher. You feel compelled to follow them, though the heat makes your shoulders prickle. It's the kind of temperature where your phone would at least 3 times warn you that it's overheating and shutting down. Meanwhile, here you are, trudging through a mystical desert like it's a casual evening stroll. Soon you spot a small figure seated atop a flat rock, back straight, hands resting loosely on their knees. An old man, lean, sun-browned, wrapped in a simple mantle the color of dust. When he lifts his face toward you, his eyes gleam with an unnerving clarity, as if he's been staring directly into the sun for years and somehow won the staring contest. "This is him," the monk says quietly, "a man who came to the desert seeking stillness but found visions instead." A warm wind sweeps across your ankles as you approach. The old hermit doesn't speak, but something about his silence feels intentional, like words would clutter the air. Behind him, etched into the rock, are faint lines, symbols. Maybe, or attempts to map something unsayable. You crouch next to the markings, brushing away dust. The pattern looks like overlapping circles, some connected by thin lines, others standing alone. You tilt your head. Solar positions? You ask aloud, though you're not sure why you think that. The monk nods. During the Great Famine that struck this region, one recorded in many histories, he claimed to see patterns in the sky that foretold its arrival. People sought him out for guidance. Some believed him, others accused him of sorcery. You run your fingertips along the carved circles. They're deeper in some places, as though he pressed harder when certain visions came. The idea of a solitary desert hermit predicting famine through celestial alignments feels both improbable and heartbreakingly earnest. You imagine him waking before dawn, tracking shadows across the dunes, connecting dots that may have existed only in his mind. Historians still debate whether he truly predicted anything. The monk adds, some say his visions were metaphors. Others think he may have had early knowledge of wind cycles and grain transport routes. You smile faintly. So, basically a medieval weather app, but with extra steps. A bark of warm laughter answers you, not from the monk, but from the hermit himself. Surprising, low, and soft, like a single clap of thunder. His eyes crease at the corners in amusement before he returns to his stillness. You take a moment to let the scene soak in. The hermit shaped by sun and solitude. The desert stretching like an unfinished thought. The monk's quiet, knowing presence at your side. Heat rolls across the dunes and presses close to you, almost comforting, like a heavy blanket on a winter night. A faint shimmer appears on the horizon. It wavers like a mirage, then steadies into a thin column of light. The monk tilts his head toward it. People came from far villages for his visions. He murmurs. Some walked through storms. Others followed the constellations he taught them to read. A gust of wind sweeps past, carrying tiny grains of sand against your skin. They sting, just a little, like reminders that this desert, real or not, has teeth. You look down and notice something half buried near your foot. A small wooden bowl, cracked along one side, its inside stained with red pigment. That was his. The monk explains. He mixed ochre with water to mark the sky's patterns. That pigment was rare, mined from a cliff that collapsed centuries ago. You lift the bowl gently. It's surprisingly lightweight, and the pigment stains your thumb. The faint rusty color reminds you of old maps, the kind with coastlines drawn too confidently. You set it back carefully, feeling like you just picked up a fragile memory. A shadow shifts behind the hermit, and you notice another carving, one you missed before. This one shows a serpent coiled around a star, its tail pointed toward a crescent moon. It's oddly similar to the Ouroboros on the cedar box you saw earlier. You glance at the monk. He nods. Yes, the symbols recur. Stories connect in ways unseen. Another breeze stirs the sand, and the hermit finally speaks, a single, rasped sentence. The sky remembers. His voice is quiet but carries the weight of someone who has spent decades listening, really listening, to the world. You feel the words settle into you, like a small stone dropped into a still pool. You ask him what he saw, what the visions truly meant. But he doesn't answer. Instead, he lifts one hand and points toward the horizon where the sun is beginning to dip. The light glows warmer, richer, as if the desert itself is inhaling deeply before exhaling the night. You take a slow breath with it, letting the heat sink into your bones. The monk steps closer and whispers. He believed the divine spoke through patterns too large for any one mind. But whether those patterns were real, he pauses. Even now, we do not know. You smiled gently, feeling the familiar tug of uncertainty. Historians still debate. You murmur. The monk smiles back. The hermit rises with surprising fluidity, as though gravity has politely decided to ease its grip on him. He walks past you, leaving faint prints in the sand, and with each step, the desert seems to soften, blurring at its edges. The wind grows cooler, the sky deepens, and when you turn to follow, the sand beneath your feet becomes stone again. The vision, if that's what it was, fades into the dim hallways of the monastery, leaving only heat on your skin and a whisper in your ear. The sky remembers. You stand on the cool stone again, the desert's warmth evaporating from your skin as though someone lifted a heavy coat off your shoulders. The corridor around you feels narrower, quieter, as if the monastery itself sensed the shift inside you. The way the hermits murmured, "The sky remembers," still vibrates faintly in your bones. You exhale, steadying yourself, and the candles lining the hall give a soft, approving flutter, like they're nodding at your progress through this increasingly surreal pilgrimage. Ahead, the corridor bends sharply, revealing a wooden door slightly ajar. Its edges are softened by age, the wood darkened by countless hands pushing it open. You step closer, feeling the grain beneath your fingertips, and gently nudge the door wider. What greets you inside is a hush thicker than the others, a hush shaped by ink, silence, and secrets. The room is small, lit by a single high window barely big enough to let in a ribbon of moonlight. Shelves cling to the walls, packed with manuscripts, scrolls, and bound volumes whose spines have long forgotten their names. A faint scent of lavender lingers in the air, surprisingly sweet among the dusty parchment. It takes you a moment to notice the desk, low, simple, positioned near the window, and sitting at it, bent over an open manuscript, is a woman. You freeze, not because she is frightening, but because she is so unexpectedly present, solid, real, her posture tense in concentration. Her fingers move across the page with the grace of someone who has copied far too much text for far too many years. The candle beside her illuminates a stern face softened by exhaustion. She does not look up. The monk appears beside you, quiet as always. She was hidden, he whispers, buried in manuscripts for centuries. You step lightly toward her, as though any sound might shatter her concentration. The woman continues her steady movement, dipping her quill, forming letters that curl like soft vines. Her handwriting is delicate yet firm, elegant in that way medieval scribes seemed to master without the aid of ergonomic pens or coffee. She was a scholar, the monk explains, a saint in all but title. But the chroniclers of her age preferred not to mention her. You inhale slowly. That tracks. Unfortunately, you glance at the shelves again and imagine scribes meticulously erasing her contributions. The faint lavender scent sharpens, as if the room itself is insulted on her behalf. What was she writing, you ask? The monk gestures toward the manuscript. Treatises, commentaries, Accounts of the Great Plague that swept across the region, the same one many histories remember only through the writings of men. A soft sigh escapes him. She was there. She treated the ill. She recorded the deaths. She preserved stories others refused to touch because they were too painful. You move closer to the manuscript, careful not to cast a shadow over her work. Her quill glides across the parchment, leaving behind dark strokes that shimmer wetly. Why was she hidden? You whisper. The monk folds his hands. Some say it was because she challenged the hierarchy. Others say her scholarship threatened the authority of certain councils. But historians still debate whether her erasure was intentional, political, or simply the result of those who copied her work omitting her name in reverence. You blink. Wait, people erased her name because they respected her? He nods slowly. Some scribes believed that true holiness required anonymity. They thought her work, not her identity, should be remembered. You let that sink in. The idea feels foreign in a world where people now watermark their lunch to prevent reposts. You glance at the woman again. She does not waver, does not flinch, does not even acknowledge your presence, but you notice something. Her posture is slightly hunched on one side, as if she favored her right shoulder. She injured herself. The monk explains. During the plague, she carried a child through the streets for miles, seeking a healer. Her shoulder never healed correctly. You swallow gently, your throat tightening with a pang you didn't expect. She continues writing, as if the memory of that injury sits quietly behind her ribs. A soft tapping draws your attention to the window. A moth flutters against the glass, drawn to her candle's glow. The room brightens momentarily each time the candle wavers, revealing more details. A small pouch hanging from the woman's belt, a woolen shawl resting nearby, and, half hidden under a stack of scrolls, a metal clasp shaped like a small lily. You reach out, brushing your fingers against the clasp. It's cool, intricately wrought, and surprisingly heavy for its size. She wore that, the monk says, when she traveled during the plague. It was a symbol of purity. You turn it over in your hand. On the underside, someone engraved a tiny prayer. You read it silently. Its wording is simple, almost painfully so. A plea for strength, for patience, for compassion. She survived, the monk says. Barely, but she never stopped writing. You feel the warmth from the candle brush against your cheek. The woman dips her quill again, and her hand trembles ever so slightly. The tremor is small, but it reveals years of work, exhaustion, grief. She wrote about the plague's arrival. The monk continues. Her account describes the first ships approaching the harbor, sails heavy. Silence eerie. The air smelled of decay even before the crew disembarked. It was a moment many chronicles recorded, but hers included a detail almost no one else mentioned. Which is? You ask gently. He gestures to the manuscript again. The bells. She wrote that before the first sailors set foot on land, a bell in the nearby tower began to ring on its own. No wind, no hand at the rope. He pauses, letting the image settle. Some believed it was a warning. Others said it was coincidence. You smile faintly. And historians still debate it? Yes, he replies. To this day. The woman's quill pauses mid-stroke, hovering above the page as though she heard the two of you. She lifts her head, just slightly. You catch only the outline of her cheek, the curve of her brow. She doesn't look at you directly. But something in the air shifts, like a feather landing on still water. She whispers a word. You lean in, heart tightening. The word is soft, cracked, barely a breath. Remember. It's unclear whether she's talking to you, to history, or to time itself. The candles flicker, the window dims, and slowly, the woman dissolves back into the haze of the past, leaving only the faint scent of lavender and the open manuscript glowing with fresh ink. You close the clasp, set it gently on the desk, and breathe out. When you step back into the corridor, the hush follows you, gentle, persistent, like fingers running along the rim of a crystal glass. And ahead, another hallway waits. The corridor seems darker after you leave the woman's chamber, as if her soft lavender presence withdrew its gentle glow from the monastery. Your footsteps echo more sharply now, each tap of your heel bouncing off the stone like a drop of water in a deep cavern. Somewhere behind you, a draft carries the faint scratch of a quill, too distant to be real, but close enough that your mind insists on filling the silence with memory. You walk until the air changes again, warmer this time, tinged with something earthy, almost herbal. It's not incense, not parchment, something more alive. The path bends into a stairwell spiraling downward, and with every step, the scent grows stronger. You inhale, and notes of crushed leaves, damp soil, and something sweet, almost medicinal, flood your senses. Halfway down the stairs, the monk appears beside you, walking with an ease that makes you question whether monks even obey the laws of gravity. You smell it already, he murmurs. The healer. You reach the landing, where the staircase opens into a vaulted chamber filled with shelves, hundreds of them. Each one crowded with jars, wooden boxes, cloth bundles, and unfamiliar instruments that look like something between gardening tools and surgical devices. The air hums with the feeling of a place used for work, for care, for desperation and hope. A single lantern burns near the center table. Beside it stands a man in a thick wool robe, sleeves rolled tightly, hands stained with green and red pigments. His hair is tied back, his face weathered, and his eyes sharp, too sharp for someone who lives surrounded by gently drying plants. He used herbs people feared. The monk says gently. They called some of them forbidden. You approach slowly, the scent intensifying. The healer turns, and for a moment his gaze lands on yours, steady, assessing, not unkind, but the look of someone who has already sized you up and diagnosed half your problems just from posture alone. Honestly, it feels a little rude but also impressive. The table before him is covered in herbs, some you recognize. Others you absolutely do not. One bundle looks suspiciously like a baby tumbleweed dipped in honey. Another resembles a cluster of long purple threads, delicate as spider silk. The healer sorts them with practiced motions, grinding one leaf, slicing another, mixing powders with the ease of someone who can do it while half asleep. He treated the sick during the winter fever. The monk explains, a fever that tore through villages after the Great Freeze. You nod. That event, the severe winter that devastated crops across parts of Europe, is well known. Records describe frozen rivers, livestock dying in fields, and food shortages that lasted months. It's the kind of historical disaster modern people would collectively respond to by baking sourdough in panic. The healer mixes crushed herbs into a small ceramic bowl. The texture turns into a fine paste, sickly green with flecks of deep red. You try to guess whether it smells pleasant or poisonous and fail miserably. He used a blend no one else dared to try. The monk continues. One of the plants was considered dangerous. Its sap could harm the nerves if treated incorrectly. The healer raises the bowl and studies it with the seriousness of someone examining a potential miracle or a very disappointing soup. Then he dips 2 fingers into the mixture and spreads a thin line onto a strip of fabric. The gesture is slow, deliberate, careful. You lean forward. What exactly is it? The monk's voice drops slightly. A mixture to reduce fever. The red pigment came from a root that grows only in marshy soil. Many healers believed it absorbed the heat of sickness. Others thought it merely stained everything terribly. A soft laugh escapes you. And historians still debate which interpretation was more accurate? Yes, he replies, very much so. The healer suddenly looks up again. His eyes soften, as though he's reading your thoughts like an open scroll. He gestures for you to step closer. You do, moving around the table until you stand across from him. He lifts a bundle of dried leaves and places it gently in your hands. The leaves are brittle, delicate, and covered in tiny silver veins that catch the lantern light. You've never seen anything like them. The scent is sharp, almost minty but with an undercurrent of something wild and metallic. He believed these leaves cooled the blood. The monk says, a notion dismissed by many of his contemporaries. You return the bundle to the table. Feeling strangely humbled, the healer's hands move again, stirring the mixture, adjusting its color, adding a few drops of water. Then he reaches beneath the table and pulls out something unexpected, a long, thin crystal vial filled with deep amber liquid. This, the monk says, is what gave him trouble. The healer holds up the vial in the lantern light, revealing amber shot through with tiny flecks of gold. You blink, thinking at first it's a trick of the flame. But no, the flecks swirl gently, shimmering like captured sparks. What is that? You whisper. Extract of a rare desert blossom. The monk answers, one that blooms only at night. For a single hour, many believed it held divine properties. Others insisted it was poison. You give a half smile. Let me guess. Historians still. The monk nods before you can finish. Debate it, yes. The healer uncorks the vial. A sweet, intense fragrance floods the air, honey, smoke, and something that feels like memory itself. You might cry or laugh or sneeze, honestly. Your body hasn't decided. He pours exactly 1 drop into the paste. The mixture brightens instantly, shifting from muddy green to luminous gold green, like moss catching the sunrise. He spreads it on another strip of cloth, humming softly to himself. His voice is low and steady, carrying a tune you don't recognize. It's not a hymn, not quite a chant, more like the sound someone makes when they're comforting a frightened child. He treated hundreds, the monk murmurs. Even nobles sought him out. Some accused him of witchcraft. Yet others credited him with saving entire villages. The healer lifts 1 prepared cloth and presses it gently against his own wrist. Testing the temperature, His expression relaxes, satisfied. Then he turns and places the cloth beside a small wooden box carved with geometric patterns. Inside are other treatments, powders, salves, oils with colors ranging from sapphire blue to muddy brown. You run a finger along the edge of the box. It bears the smell of pine sap and old battles, quiet. Diligent battles fought not with swords but with mixtures and midnight effort. There's something profoundly human in the sight of this man mixing herbs in a cold chamber to fight an invisible enemy. Behind him, a small parchment hangs pinned to the wall. You step closer to read it. A list of symptoms, notes in cramped handwriting, doodles of leaves, and near the bottom, a set of instructions written in a firmer hand. If the fever takes the mind, sing softly. The voice reminds the soul where the body is. You swallow, unexpectedly moved. He wrote that for the apprentices he never had time to train. The monk says, he hoped someone would understand. You stare at the parchment. The room feels warmer, softer. You imagine him kneeling beside a patient, singing into the fever-dark air, guiding them back with nothing but his voice. The healer finally turns to you again. He lifts the amber vial, hesitates, then presses it into your hand. Light glows through the glass, sending tiny sparks across your palm. A gift, a memory, a burden. You look up, but he is already fading. The lantern light dims. The herbs lose their color. The walls melt back into stone. And you're standing alone in the corridor. The scent of wild leaves lingering faintly in the air. Ahead, another doorway waits, its darkness curling like a quiet invitation. You linger for a moment in the corridor, your fingers brushing the fading warmth of the amber vial the healer pressed into your hand, except when you look down. The vial is gone, not dropped, not pocketed, simply no longer here. A phantom gift, a memory you're expected to carry without needing the physical weight. The scent of rare blossoms still clings faintly to your sleeve, like a whisper that refuses to leave. Ahead, the corridor expands into an arched passageway lined with stone columns. You feel the temperature rise. Not warmly but tensely, like the air itself knows something is about to shift. And it does, because as you step forward, the candles suddenly flicker sideways, all at once, as if blown by a gust of wind that never touches your skin. You hear it next, the distant echo of raised voices. Not shouts, not yet, but heated, urgent, political. The monk appears beside you again, though this time, he seems heavier, his steps quieter, his robe carrying the weight of something unsaid. Storms, he murmurs, over the holy city. You follow the voices through an open archway into a vast hall lit by tall windows cut into the stone. Moonlight spills across the floor in pale rivers, illuminating rows of benches, a long table, and a cluster of figures frozen in conversation. Cloaks, sandals, scribes with ink-stained hands. A couple of guards trying very hard not to look bored. At the center of it all stands a man you instinctively recognize as someone important. Not because of his clothes, they're simple enough, but because he radiates the kind of calm authority people argue around but rarely argue with. His beard is streaked with gray, his eyes sharp, and his posture steady. He was a saint, the monk says, though not everyone agreed at the time. The voices swell again as two men gesture angrily toward a parchment on the table. You can't hear every word, but the tension is unmistakable. The stakes are high, and the saint in the center raises a hand, not loudly, not dramatically, just with the quiet expectation that people will stop speaking because he asked them to. Shockingly, they do. You step closer, blending into the edges of the hall like a curious shadow. The table holds a series of documents detailing trade routes, supply shortages, and the political pressure building inside the holy city. You recognize some references. This period was marked by intense conflict between rival religious factions competing for influence. A well-known historical tension, often simplified into dates and battles. But here it breathes with human impatience and fear. He tried to mediate, the monk says, voice barely above a whisper. He believed unity was still possible, even as the city fractured around him. The saint picks up a parchment and taps its edge gently. His voice, when it rises, sounds tired but determined. You wish you could understand the exact words. But the tone says enough. He is urging calm, urging diplomacy, urging something dangerously close to reason. A guard shifts beside you, his armor clinking softly. You notice a strange symbol etched onto the guard's leather belt, a stylized knot with 7 loops. You point to it, raising a brow at the monk. A minor brotherhood, he explains, a group tasked with protecting religious negotiators. Nearly forgotten now. He pauses. Their emblem was later mistaken for a decorative motif in many manuscripts. Historians still debate whether they actually wielded influence or were merely ceremonial. Of course they do, you think, because historians will debate literally anything if given enough time and coffee. The saint moves toward a window, the moonlight catching in his hair. He seems lost in thought. You follow his gaze outward, noticing a faint glow on the horizon, fires burning in distant neighborhoods. The city is not fully asleep. Tension simmers like water just before it boils. A young messenger bursts into the hall. He bows quickly and hands the saint a sealed scroll. The saint breaks the seal, reads it, and closes his eyes for a moment too long to be casual. The monk leans closer to you. A riot broke out in the western quarter that night, a small spark in the larger conflict. Your chest tightens with sudden empathy for this man who had to hold a city's anger in his hands. You imagine him exhaling deeply, preparing to walk straight into the fire without armor or shield, because sometimes saints don't get those. They get conviction instead, which is heavier. The saint turns to the others. His movements are slow but deliberate as he picks up a staff leaning against the table. Not ornate, just ash wood, polished smooth by years of use. He steps down from the platform and begins to walk through the hall. You follow. His sandals whisper against the stone. As he pushes open the heavy doors, a gust of warm night air sweeps in, carrying the smell of smoke, spice, and something metallic, like the faint tang of tension itself. The city outside is dim but restless. Torches light the streets. Somewhere distant, someone shouts. You walk beside him, unnoticed by the people who rush past. A woman carries water in a clay jug, glancing nervously over her shoulder. A group of young men hurry in the opposite direction, their faces flushed, their words sharp. He walked into the chaos. The monk says, he believed presence could calm what speeches could not. At a crossroads, a crowd gathers. Two groups argue, too loudly, too bitterly. Their torches cast wild shadows across the walls, making every gesture seem larger and more dangerous. The saint steps forward, placing himself directly between them. He doesn't lift his voice. He simply raises his staff and lets the wood tap lightly against the stones. The sound is soft, barely audible, but something about it draws attention. The arguing slows. The crowd looks toward him. He speaks. You don't need to understand the words. You see the effect, the shoulders unclenching, the breath returning, the fire in their eyes dimming by a degree. Not enough to end the conflict, but enough to soften its edge. The monk's voice is almost reverent. He quoted a proverb believed to be older than the city itself. About strength in patience, about wisdom in restraint. The words were said to have been carved once into the very stones of the temple walls. The saint finishes speaking. The crowd doesn't disperse entirely, but the immediate danger fades. One man lowers his torch. Another exhales shakily. A woman nods, leaning into her husband's arm. Slowly, the saint turns back toward you. For a second, you meet his gaze. It's weary, lined, human, beautiful in its vulnerability. He sees more than he can fix. And still, he tries. A wind sweeps the street, carrying dust and distant footsteps. The saint fades like smoke pulled into the night air. You blink. The city dissolves. You're back in the monastery corridor. The door behind you closing on its own with a soft click. Another path unfurls ahead, waiting. Patient, inevitable. The corridor ahead feels cooler. As though the memory of the burning city stayed behind you while the stone walls insisted on their own calm. Ancient chill. Your steps soften without you meaning to. The hush deepening into something thicker, denser, like the monastery is drawing along. Slow breath on your behalf. The monk walks with you again, silent for several moments. His face looks more shadowed than before. You wonder if recounting these stories costs him something. If each memory tugged loose from the past leaves a faint ache behind. He finally speaks, voice steady but low. There are places within these halls where suffering settled like dust. Places where faith and fear lived side by side. You follow him into a smaller passageway. Its ceiling lower, its torches dimmer. The air here tastes metallic, cold, and as you descend a short flight of stairs, you begin to understand why. The chamber at the bottom is a prison. Not a sprawling dungeon of chains and dramatic moans, just a plain rectangular space carved from stone. With alcoves that hold iron bars and shadows thick enough to hide in. A single lantern hangs from a hook, its glow trembling across the room like a nervous heartbeat. A figure sits on the ground near the back wall. He is barefoot, his robe torn at the hem. Shackles lie abandoned beside him, not locked. Just resting, as though he chose not to wear them rather than being freed from them. His hair is matted, his face thin but resolute. And his eyes, they're the kind of eyes that have seen more than they will ever say. The monk's whisper is barely audible. A saint imprisoned not for a crime, but for a question. You take a slow step closer. The stone floor is cold enough to seep through your bones. As your eyes adjust, You see that the man is tracing shapes into the dust, lines and circles, intersecting with the precision of someone who uses symbols as prayers. "What was the question?" you ask softly. The monk glances toward the man's hands. He challenged a doctrine, not with rebellion, but with curiosity. He asked whether divine mercy could extend beyond borders defined by men. You almost laugh, not because it's funny, but because the idea of imprisoning someone for curiosity feels absurd in a modern world where people regularly post conspiracy theories about lizard kings from their sofas. Back then, though, ideas were tender, too easily ignited. Near the prisoner's feet lies a small piece of metal, a shard of a mirror. Perhaps once whole, now cracked into glittering fragments. He picks it up gingerly and tilts it toward the lantern, splitting the light into several tiny reflections that dance across the walls. He kept that fragment, the monk explains, to remind himself that truth can have more than one face. You exhale. Something about that feels too relevant to your own life. The prisoner sets the shard down and closes his eyes. Leaning his head against the stone, a faint chant begins to stir from his lips, quiet, steady, unlike any chant you've heard in the monastery so far. The rhythm is slow, each note stretching like a thread pulled through fabric. It's a song from his homeland, the monk says. He sang it each night. A lullaby taught to children. A memory strong enough to soften the fear. You step closer to him. The lantern light casts a warmth on his face, making him look less ghostly and more human. Vulnerable, but unbroken. What happened to him, you ask? The monk's eyes flicker. He endured. You wait for more, but he doesn't speak again. Instead, the chamber begins to shift, not physically, but with the weight of a memory rising from the stone like warm vapor. The air thickens with echoes, footsteps of guards, whispered prayers of visitors, the scrape of metal against stone. The room hums with past tension. And suddenly, you feel it. The moment he was brought here. You see a door burst open. You hear the clatter of armor. 2 soldiers escorting him inside, though escort might be generous, since they looked just as troubled as he did. A bishop steps forward, robes heavy and shimmering with gold thread. He gives a speech you can't hear clearly, but the tone is unmistakable. Certainty delivered with too much confidence. The prisoner listens in silence. At the end, he nods once. He agreed to confinement, the monk says quietly, because he believed patience would reveal truth more clearly than debate. A known historical event unfurls around you. A schism that once split the region's leaders, leading to councils, arguments, and near violence. Chronicles describe political tensions and theological disputes, but they rarely mention the small stories buried within, the ones like this, where a single man chose stillness over chaos. An obscure detail emerges in the scene. When he entered the cell, he placed a small wooden bead on the floor, no larger than a fingertip. The bead was carved with a single star. You never would have noticed it unless the lantern light happened to catch its smooth surface. He carried that bead from childhood, the monk says, a keepsake from a traveler who claimed it was carved from a tree struck by lightning. A symbol of survival. The prisoner fingers the bead gently, then sets it atop the mirror shard, aligning the star's carved point with one of the reflected lights on the wall. He believed the reflections were guiding something. The monk says, though historians still debate whether he sought prophecy or simply comfort. You crouch beside the man. The dust beneath your knees is cold. He opens his eyes and looks at you, not startled, not confused. He looks as though he's been expecting someone. Anyone. A witness. Maybe. You listen. He whispers. You nod. He smiles faintly. And for the first time, the cell doesn't feel like a place of confinement. It feels like a pause. A breath held for clarity. The monk kneels beside you. During his imprisonment, he wrote only one sentence. On the wall behind him. You turn, scanning the stone. There, barely visible, carved in shallow lines. Chains reveal what freedom hides. You shiver. The prisoner closes his eyes again, serenely, as if that truth, quiet, heavy, is enough to sustain him. The lantern flickers, the walls lighten, the echoes fade. When you stand, the cell dissolves back into the corridor. The cold lifts from your bones. Only the carved sentence lingers in your mind, glowing like an ember that refuses to die. Ahead, another passage opens, narrow, uncertain, waiting. The corridor leading out of the cell feels narrower than before, as though the weight of the prisoners whispered. Chains reveal what freedom hides, follows you like a ribbon of cold air. You wrap your arms lightly around yourself, instinctively bracing for the next shift, the next memory, or maybe the next quiet storm waiting somewhere in these walls. You trail behind the monk as he glides through another archway. He pauses for a moment, listening, as if tuning himself to the vibrations of a distant past. Then he turns down a long hallway that slopes gently downward, its stone floor worn smooth by centuries of sandaled feet. The air thickens with dust and faint tension, and you catch the scent of smoke, not fire, but something older and tired, like ashes unreachable by wind. War came close to these halls once. The monk murmurs, but it was stopped at the edge of a pilgrimage. You round a corner, and the corridor widens into an open plaza, not a modern square but the ancient kind. Lined with battered pillars and marked by time, a chill breeze slips through the space, carrying faint echoes of footsteps, murmurs, and the distant clang of armor. You're no longer alone. A line of pilgrims crosses the plaza, some barefoot, some leaning on staffs polished by long journeys, some clutching wrapped bundles against their chests. They look exhausted but determined. Dust coats their robes, and their faces hold the strain of people caught between devotion and fear. At the forefront walks a priest with tired shoulders and kind eyes. His robe is patched in places, his sandals cracked, yet he holds himself with quiet resolve, guiding the group with the gentle authority of someone who has endured years of hard travel. He led them, the monk says softly, at a time when armies were closing in. A known historical event flickers into place around you. The outbreak of a regional conflict that once tore through roads used by countless pilgrims. Chronicles describe armies marching, borders shifting, and holy routes becoming hazardous. You feel the tremble of that era settle through the plaza, like distant thunder approaching. The priest raises a hand, signaling the group to pause. Some sink onto nearby stones, grateful for the break. Others continue whispering prayers. A woman adjusts the cloth wrapped around a small icon she carries, her fingers trembling. You step closer. the air cooling as you near the pilgrims. Your footsteps make no sound, as though your presence belongs more to the memory than to the stones. He argued, the monk explains, that pilgrims should remain neutral ground, that no army should touch them. You give a dry little laugh, and I'm guessing that argument didn't go over terribly well. The monk's expression wavers between sadness and something like fondness. At first, no. A rhythmic drumming rises from the edge of the plaza. Not drums, hooves, horses. The sound grows louder. The pilgrims stiffen. A man clutches his satchel to his chest. A child hides behind her mother's robe. Through a stone arch strides a small group of soldiers. Armor dull from dust. Banners stitched with symbols that flicker in the wind like restless tongues. Their leader, a stern-faced captain, rides ahead. Posture rigid, gaze sharp as a blade. You feel the temperature drop. The monk stands beside you, his voice barely above the breeze. They were told no one would pass this way unharmed. The priest steps forward, hands raised, not in surrender, not in challenge, but in simple presence. There is no trembling in him, just a slow exhale, like he has already made peace with whatever happens next. The captain dismounts, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. He approaches the priest, eyes scanning the group. This road is closed, he says, voice echoing off the plaza's worn stones. The priest bows his head. We seek safe passage to the shrine. He replies softly, we carry no arms. The captain's jaw tightens. The soldiers shift behind him. The monk leans slightly toward you. This moment, he whispers, is rarely mentioned in histories. Yet it turned the tide of that day. You watch as the priest reaches into his robe. The soldiers tense, hands flying to their hilts. You even tense a little, because even in a dream walk through memory. Impulsive movement around soldiers is a universally bad idea. But the priest withdraws something simple. A loaf of bread. Round, cracked, fresh enough for its scent to drift into the air. He breaks it in two and offers half to the captain. You blink. Bread. The captain stares at it like someone offered him a puzzle. A simple object, yet somehow heavier than iron. It was a gesture from his homeland. The monk explains. To break bread was to offer peace. No contract, no oath, just humanity. You watch the silent tension stretch thin as a bowstring. Then, astonishingly, the captain accepts. Barely a nod, barely a breath, but he takes the bread, breaks off a piece, and eats. The effect is immediate. The soldiers relax, shoulders softening. A murmur passes through the pilgrims. Something in the air shifts, like dust settling after a storm. The captain turns toward his men. Let them pass. The priest bows. The pilgrims exhale, and without another word, the soldiers remount and ride away, leaving only hoofprints in the dust and a faint smell of leather and iron. You release a breath you didn't realize you were holding. So he stopped a battle with carbs. You murmur. The monk chuckles softly, in a manner of speaking. You walk through the plaza as the pilgrims begin to move forward again. Their steps lighter, their fear less sharp. A child waves a little ragged ribbon in the air, skipping despite the dust. A man hums a tune, soft but steady. The priest watches them fondly, his expression a blend of relief and humility. He never wrote about it. The monk adds, But others did. Some claimed a miracle. Some said the captain recognized an old friend in the priest. Others insisted the bread itself had symbolic power. You raise a brow, and historians still debate which version is true. He nods, endlessly. You linger near a pillar where a small carving catches your eye. A simple circle bisected by a line. You touch it, realizing the shape resembles the way the loaf cracked in the priest's hands. Perhaps someone carved it later. Perhaps it always belonged there. Memory is mischievous like that. As the pilgrims depart into the shifting light, the plaza dims, its edges blurring like dust stirred by wind. One by one, the figures fade. The priest is the last to vanish. He turns once, offering a calm nod, as though you, too, were part of the crowd he shepherded safely through danger. Then the plaza dissolves into stone walls once again. You stand in the corridor, heart slower, breath deeper. Ahead, another story curls through the darkness, waiting for your steps. The corridor ahead feels softer somehow, less like stone and more like a quiet exhale. After the heavy tension of the pilgrim's narrow escape, you welcome the gentler dark, the way it folds around you like a blanket fresh from the dryer. The candles along the walls no longer flicker urgently, they glow with a steady, rhythmic pulse, as though syncing themselves to your footsteps. The monk walks beside you again, though he stays silent longer than usual. His presence is steady, warm in that restrained monastic way that suggests he's mastered emotional expression with the same minimalism as interior decor in a monastery cell. Eventually he slows, lifting his gaze toward a narrow wooden door just ahead. He lived behind this one, the monk murmurs, a man who chose silence over speech. You approach the door, noticing the faint scratches along its surface, marks that look suspiciously like tally marks. Perhaps from someone tracking days, prayers, or maybe how many times a novice knocked before remembering this room was off limits. You push gently, and the door swings inward without a sound. The room is small, even by monastic standards. A low cot, a wooden desk with no drawers, a single three-legged stool, shelves with only 2 items on them, a clay bowl and a length of cloth neatly folded. That's it. The absence of clutter is almost aggressively clean. If minimalism had a patron saint, this man was probably on the short list. But what truly catches you is the atmosphere. Silence. Not just quiet, but true. Practiced, intentional silence. It wraps around you like cool water. Soothing and strangely heavy. You almost feel guilty breathing loudly. At the center of the room sits a man. Cross-legged, back straight despite clear age. His robe is simple, patched over the knees, and his hair falls loosely around his face. His eyes are closed, but his posture is alert, like someone asleep with one foot in the waking world. You sense he's aware of your presence even if he hasn't moved. He took a vow, the monk explains softly, for reasons only a few understood. You lower yourself onto the stool, feeling its uneven legs shift under your weight. The silence presses against your skin. The man breathes deeply, long inhales that seem to carry whole worlds inside them. Did he ever speak at all? You whisper. The monk nods. Once, when he entered the order. And once again, at the end. A faint smile touches the monk's lips. 2 sentences in an entire lifetime. You glance at the shelves again, noticing faint markings etched into the wall. Symbols, small and simple, circles, dots, lines intersecting each other. You point to them. He used those to speak. The monk says. Gestures, symbols, expressions. He communicated without words. You study the symbols more closely. Some are placed near eye level, others closer to the floor. They map a language so intimate and quiet you feel like you're intruding on a private dialogue between breath and thought. What did he do all day, you ask, trying not to sound too modernly impatient. Listened, the monk replies, to footsteps, to wind, to the heartbeat of stone. He believed holiness was found in hearing what others never notice. The silence thickens. You instinctively slow your breathing, as though adjusting to a room with its own rules. Then something shifts subtly. The man opens his eyes. They are dark, warm, and startlingly aware. He doesn't flinch at your presence. His gaze rests on you the way a teacher studies a student who doesn't yet realize they're being taught. He lifts one hand and draws a simple circle in the air. The monk interprets. He welcomes you. The gesture feels strangely moving, like a gentle tap on the shoulder from a dream. You bow your head a little, whispering, "Hello." The man nods once, then points toward the window. You hadn't even noticed there was a window. It's barely more than an opening carved into the stone. Outside, the sky is streaked with color, hues of gold, rose, and pale violet. Dawn? Sunset? The room seems unbound by time, so it might be either, or both. A faint breeze drifts in, carrying the scent of pine resin and cold earth. He preferred sunrise, the monk says. He believed it was the hour when truth was most honest. You inhale the crisp air, letting it clear your mind. The man reaches to the side and picks up a thin reed brush. He dips it into the clay bowl, its contents a pale, watery ink, and begins to paint strokes onto a piece of parchment. The lines are delicate, flowing, like wind drawn on paper. "What's he writing?" you whisper. The monk tilts his head, showing, not writing. The parchment reveals a landscape, simple and elegant. A hill, a tree, a small figure beneath it. You lean closer. The figure is sitting, much like the man himself. He painted these every day. The monk continues, hundreds of them, each slightly different. As you watch, the man adds a final detail, a tiny bird perched on the tree's branch. The brush trembles faintly, age showing in his hand, but the stroke is steady enough to capture the bird's delicate shape. An obscure detail surfaces in your thoughts as the monk whispers. During the great drought that struck the region, a drought that lasted years, he created a water map using only birds. You blink. A water map? Yes. He observed the paths birds took at dawn. Where they flew first, where they circled, where they drank. He marked those patterns, and from them determined where underground springs might still exist. That actually works? You whisper, eyebrows rising. The monk smiles gently. Historians still debate whether his map was accurate or just beautifully symbolic. You chuckle under your breath. Of course they do. The silent man finishes the painting and lifts the parchment toward the window. Letting the light illuminate the ink, his expression softens, as though he feels affection for the small world he created. Then, surprisingly, he offers it to you. You hesitate, unsure if you should touch something so fragile. But he insists with a kind, steady gesture. You accept it. The parchment is warm from his hands. The ink smells of earth and crushed leaves. You feel something shift in your chest, like a stone settling into place. The man lifts his hand again and draws two shapes, a small circle, then a larger one around it. You don't understand, but the monk whispers. He says, "Be still inside, even when the world surrounds you." You close your eyes. The words hit deeper than expected. When you open them again, the man has closed his own eyes once more. His breathing slows, returning to its earlier rhythm. He is the shape of stillness, the outline of peace drawn onto the air. A final detail catches your eye. A tiny mark on the wall near the floor, a handprint. Faint, ancient, smaller than his current hand, perhaps from years before his vow. A reminder of who he once was. You rise quietly. As you step through the doorway, the silence loosens its hold, giving you back the ordinary sounds of your breath and footsteps. But the stillness stays inside you, settling somewhere below your ribs, like a stone placed deliberately in a stream. The corridor opens ahead, dim and patient. Another story waits. The corridor after the silent monk's chamber feels almost loud by comparison. Even though nothing actually makes a sound, your footsteps echo a little too eagerly. The candles flicker with a hint of mischief, and even the air seems to hum faintly, as if relieved to speak again after holding its breath for so long. You shake out your shoulders, realizing how tightly the stillness had wrapped itself around you, like a weighted blanket made entirely of hush. The monk walks a step ahead, his pace slow and steady. The corners of his robe brush the floor like strokes of a careful painter. Not all saints lived quietly. He murmurs. Some encountered the extraordinary in ways that leave traces even now. You follow him around a bend, where the architecture subtly shifts. The stone becomes smoother, almost polished, and the corridor widens into a circular antechamber with a domed ceiling painted in fading colors. You look up and catch glimpses of wings, faint, feathered shapes stretching across the curve of the dome. Here, the monk says, a story unfolded that changed many minds. A soft breeze curls through the chamber, brushing against your cheek like fingers testing your presence. The temperature shifts, not cold, not warm, but tinged with the kind of energy that precedes something unusual. You step closer to the center of the room, where a carved stone pedestal sits beneath the dome. Atop the pedestal rests an object that seems entirely out of place in a monastery hallway. A simple walking cloak. Travel-worn, thin, frayed at the hem, its color somewhere between beige, sand, and old parchment. It looks like the sort of cloak someone would wear while trudging across mountains or trying valiantly to survive a windy Tuesday. You touch it lightly. The fabric tingles under your fingers, not painfully, but like static electricity with a memory. This belonged to him, the monk says, a man who insisted he once met an angel. You raise an eyebrow. An actual angel? Wings, glow, the whole package? The monk gives a serene shrug. Descriptions vary. Because of course they do. He steps closer to the cloak, almost reverently. He was a wanderer, a holy man who traveled between villages offering counsel, comfort, And occasionally, unsolicited advice. The monk's tone softens. He was beloved, and also occasionally doubted. You circle the pedestal slowly. The cloak seems ordinary at first glance. But the longer you look, the more your eyes pick up oddities, tiny threads of silver woven into the seams. Subtle patterns like faint geometric shapes stitched along the edges. During a well-known famine, the monk continues, he traveled to a remote valley cut off from supply routes. He brought what help he could. But one night, while resting near the old stone bridge, he encountered a stranger. A faint shimmer rises from the cloak, as though the air above it momentarily wavers. You lean closer. What kind of stranger? You ask. One who knew his name, the monk says, and his past, and his doubts. You step back, a chill running down your arms. The monk walks toward the edge of the chamber, where a wall painting, faded nearly to nothing, shows the outline of a bridge beneath a starry sky. Two figures meet in the center, one slightly luminous. Some said the stranger glowed. The monk murmurs. Others claimed the light was merely the moon on frost. His tone gains a playful note. Historians still debate whether the account was symbolic, exaggerated, or simply misinterpreted. You grin. So basically, maybe angel, maybe miscommunication, maybe moonlight with good marketing. Precisely. Your gaze returns to the cloak. You trace the faint geometric pattern again and realize it resembles a wing, not a literal feathered wing, but an abstracted shape, the way a child might draw flight. What happened during that meeting? You ask quietly. The monk clasps his hands behind his back. He wrote only that the stranger told him something he needed to hear. Something that restored his courage in a time when he felt very small. You wait. The monk remains silent. Are you going to tell me what it was? You finally whisper. Ah, he says gently. He never recorded the words. You groan softly. Of course he didn't. But something about that makes your chest tighten. The idea that an entire life could be nudged back onto its path by a sentence lost to history feels both frustrating and heartbreakingly human. The chamber suddenly flickers. Not the light, the room itself. For a moment you're not standing in the monastery, but on a frost-covered bridge under a moon that shines too brightly to be normal. You see the wanderer, a thin man, wrapped in the same cloak before you, gripping it tightly around his shoulders. And beside him, a taller figure, features indistinct, but radiant with something like patience, or love, or just very powerful moonlighting. You can't hear their words, but you feel them echo through the air, like a heartbeat pressed against your ear. The vision dissolves, leaving you breathless. You rest a hand on the pedestal to steady yourself. The cloak feels heavier now, charged with significance. As you lean closer, you spot something tucked beneath it, a small wooden carving shaped like a feather. Simple, rough, clearly made by hand. That, the monk says, his voice warm, he carried everywhere. A reminder of humility. You pick up the carving. It fits perfectly in your palm. A hint of worn smoothness suggests it was handled often, thumb tracing the grooves. Carving absorbing the weight of unspoken prayers. He gave a sermon the next morning. The monk continues. That became the heart of his legacy. A message about hope during the famine. About believing light can reach into the darkest valleys. You straighten slowly. Was that the well-known historical event tied to this? The monk nods. His sermon inspired an entire region during the winter famine. It's mentioned in many chronicles. Some say it prevented despair from turning to violence. Your fingers close around the wooden feather, warming it. The monk watches you with a tenderness that feels older than centuries. He never claimed certainty that the stranger was an angel. The monk says, only that the encounter taught him how to see the world again. And people believed him, you ask? Some did, others mocked him, and some believed him only after he performed acts of kindness no one could explain. The chamber dims slightly, as if the memory itself is stepping back into place. You set the wooden feather down, gently, beside the cloak. Then you notice something you missed before, the faintest glimmer on the cloak's inner lining. Silver thread forming two tiny words. You lean closer to read them. Fear not. A message small enough to miss, but powerful enough to guide someone through a famine. The monk gives a quiet nod toward the corridor. He left those words for anyone who might need them. You take a slow breath, letting the words settle beneath your ribs, near the memory of the silent monk's stillness and the prisoner's carved sentence. You step out of the chamber. The cloak fades, the pedestal dissolves, and the corridor ahead brightens gently, as though illuminated by unseen wings. Another story stirs in the dark. Waiting, the corridor draws you forward with a gentle confidence, as though it's grown accustomed to your presence, your quiet footsteps, your small gasps of wonder, the soft weight of every story settling deeper into you. The candles burn warmer now, their flames steady and almost affectionate, like they've decided you're worthy of knowing what comes next. The monk walks beside you again, hands folded, gaze far away. Joy used to echo through these halls. He says softly, not all stories are sorrowful. Some shimmer with celebration. You turn a corner and feel the shift immediately. Warmth, light, the lively hum of distant voices. You step through an archway and enter a massive hall, vast and pillared, with banners hanging from the ceiling, their colors faded but still bright enough to suggest festivity. Long tables stretch across the room, covered in remnants of what might once have been a grand feast. Jugs, platters, crumbs, a single jug of wine tipped on its side, as though abandoned mid-toast. And among it all, laughter. Soft, echoing laughter, the kind that lingers in the air even after the people who made it have long since passed through memory. This, the monk murmurs, was the feast without end. You blink. Sounds dramatic. It was, he replies with a faint smile. You walk between the tables, passing places where people once sat, pilgrims, monks, villagers, strangers, and you can almost see them. Hear their chatter. Feel the clink of cups raised in goodwill. The floor beneath your feet is sticky with time, as though the celebration refuses to fade entirely. At the far end of the hall stands a raised platform. On it, a man in simple robes laughs with a joy so bright it feels like a warm blanket wrapped around the entire room. He raises a cup in the vision that shimmers before you, and the hall answers him with cheers. He was the saint known for hospitality. The monk explains, he believed every shared meal brought the world closer to peace. You approach the platform, watching the echoes unfold. The saint, round-faced, eyes bright, beard streaked with silver, walks among the tables, refilling cups, clapping shoulders, blessing children too shy to meet his gaze. There's a kindness to him that feels so rich it's almost tangible. He hosted this feast every year, the monk says, during a well-known festival celebrating the harvest. You nod slowly. The festival appears in many chronicles, an event meant to unify communities after the hard labor of gathering crops. But in this hall, it feels alive, joyful in a way that warms even the quiet corners of your memory. The saint pauses at a table and picks up a loaf of bread, fresh, round, still steaming. He breaks it and gives half to a child, laughing as the child's eyes widen in delight at the warmth. And then, the monk continues, a strange thing happened. The atmosphere shifts, the laughter quiets. The saint sets the loaf down and steps toward a clay jug, brown, chipped, decorated with a simple swirl. He lifts it, tilts it, and wine pours out. Deep red, smooth, continuous. The jug should have emptied long ago. But it doesn't stop. You blink hard. Seriously? The monk nods, eyes twinkling. Seriously. The saint stares at it too, utterly bewildered. Then he laughs, a loud, delighted laugh, and raises the jug like a victorious hero. The hall erupts. People clap, shout, rejoice. Someone shouts that it's a miracle. Someone else demands to know the recipe. The monk smiles. Some say it was endless. Others say he spent months secretly refilling jugs to ensure guests never lacked wine. Historians still debate which account is true. You grin. I'm rooting for the secret refill theory. Seems chaotic. Indeed, the monk says gently. The vision shifts again. You notice an obscure detail near the platform, a small basket tucked out of sight beneath the table. Inside it, grapes. Wrinkled, dusty grapes, almost invisible unless you're searching for them. He used those, the monk explains. They grew from a single vine in his family garden. A vine said to have survived a drought when all others died. The grapes, shriveled, stubborn, feel like symbols of persistence, of something small turning into something generous. You wander toward another table. There you find a wooden spoon carved with intricate designs, spirals, vines, tiny clusters of fruit. You lift it gently. He carved that spoon himself. The monk says. He made hundreds over his life and gave them away. People said food tasted better when stirred with one of his spoons. That seems unlikely, you murmur. Perhaps, the monk says, but belief is a flavor of its own. You set the spoon down and walk through the hall again. The echoes dancing around you. People raise cups to friends. A pair of children chase each other between the benches. A dog, yes, a dog, trots across the floor, tail wagging, hoping for dropped scraps. Your heart warms. If earlier chambers felt heavy with burden, this one feels light enough to lift you off your feet. The saint moves to the center of the room and gestures for quiet. Gradually, the laughter fades, the crowd settling like ripples calming on a lake. He begins to speak. You can't understand the words, but the tone is unmistakable: gratitude, unity, joy. His voice carries across the hall like sunshine. People listen with bright eyes and soft smiles. You swear you feel warmth on your own cheeks. He said. The monk whispers that every feast must nourish not only the body but the heart. That shared joy is a form of prayer. You breathe in deeply. The hall smells of warm bread, spiced wine, lingering sweetness. Then, you hear something else. A low rumble. You look at the saint. He hears it too. The hall trembles faintly, not from panic, but from possibility. The feast lasted days. The monk says, longer than intended. People stayed, unwilling to leave the warmth. Songs were sung, stories traded, arguments settled, hopes renewed. You watch the saint walk among his guests again, lifting his hands in blessing, letting others lean on him, letting laughter rebound off the rafters like soft thunder. The vision begins to soften, colors turning hazy, shapes fading into gold dust. The tables dissolve, the banners fall into shadow. The wine jug flickers once, and then vanishes. Only the warmth remains. You stand alone in the hall, though its joy lingers like an echo of sunlight. Your chest feels lighter, your breath softer. The monk touches your shoulder gently. He believed joy could mend things broken by sorrow. You nod. I think he was right. As you leave the hall through the opposite archway, the warmth follows you like a loyal companion. The corridor ahead glimmers faintly, as though touched by leftover gold. Another story waits in the dimness, patient and ready. The warmth of the feast clings to you as you move deeper into the monastery. A lingering glow beneath your ribs. It's almost jarring when the corridor ahead cools suddenly, the air thinning like a held breath. The candles here are dimmer, their light stretched thin across the stones, as if this part of the monastery has learned to keep its secrets close. The monk appears again at your side, not stepping out of the shadows, but simply existing there, as if he had been waiting for you to catch up. This wing, he murmurs, is where knowledge hid when the world around it grew hostile. You raise an eyebrow. Hostile toward knowledge? Sounds familiar. The monk gives a quiet, sympathetic smile. Some things do not change. He leads you down a narrow passage until you reach a small wooden door sunk into the wall. It is plain, scratched, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of door you might walk past without noticing 100 times. But the monk places his palm upon it, and the hinges release a soft sigh, swinging inward. A draft of cool air brushes your face, carrying faint notes of parchment, dust, and something metallic, like old keys. You step inside and nearly stop breathing. A hidden library. Not vast, not ornate, no towering bookcases or gold-embellished tomes. Instead, shelves built into the stone hold stacks of manuscripts tied with fraying cords. Scrolls bundled in soft cloth, thin tablets carved with symbols, and small chests filled with loose fragments of text. A single lantern glows from a hook in the ceiling, illuminating the room like a secret held cupped in gentle hands. This chamber, the monk whispers, was unknown to most who lived here. Your footsteps barely make a sound on the smooth floor. You trace your fingers along the shelves, feeling the uneven textures of ancient bindings. Some pages curl like dried leaves. Others look surprisingly intact, ink still bold and confident on the surface. Who hid all this? You ask softly. The monk gestures toward the far corner of the room. There, kneeling at a low writing table, is a man with hair pulled into a loose knot and robes marked with ink stains. He is lean, sharp-featured, and hunched forward with the intensity of someone who measures time by candle burn rather than hours. His quill scratches steadily across the parchment before him. A scholar, the monk says, a saint of thought, though he would have rejected the title. You step closer, noticing the piles of notes around him, maps, commentaries, diagrams, copied legends, odd lists of astronomical observations, and pages filled with tiny precise handwriting. He moves with purpose, dipping his quill, rolling a scroll, unfurling another, weaving threads of knowledge through time. What was he working on, you ask? The monk tilts his head. A compilation, teachings, histories, writings deemed too dangerous, too confusing, or too ahead of their time. You lean over one of the tables and glimpse a parchment containing a diagram of the solar system, drawn centuries before such ideas became acceptable. Circles, lines, and a bold note reading, "Movement is truth." Your eyebrows lift. That would have gotten him in trouble. Yes, the monk agrees, and it did. A well-known historical event takes shape around you. A period of church reform and consolidation, during which unauthorized writings were burned or confiscated. Scholars were questioned. Ideas were sifted aggressively between permitted doctrine and forbidden speculation. He hid the manuscripts, the monk says, to preserve what he feared would be lost. You reach toward a scroll wrapped in faded blue cloth. When you untie it gently, you find an obscure detail. A list of plants believed to affect memory, some real, some mythical. One is labeled, the night herb that grows only in moonlight. You glance at the monk. He nods. Its existence was never proven. Historians still debate whether it was a metaphor or a misidentified plant. You chuckle quietly, or maybe he just liked poetic botany. Perhaps. The scholar shifts suddenly, his quill pausing mid-line. He turns slightly, not enough to look at you, but enough that you see the exhaustion carved into his features. Ink stains mark his fingers like permanent shadows. Yet his eyes burn with a quiet purpose, the sort of fire that cannot be extinguished by doubt or danger. A faint tremor shakes the library, then, not violent, but sharp enough to cause a few scrolls to rustle. You glance at the monk. "Earthquake?" you whisper. He shakes his head. "No. Soldiers." Your heartbeat slows, then quickens. A door slams somewhere above. Voices echo, sharp and commanding. The scholar stiffens. He closes the book he's writing in and blows out the candle beside him, plunging half the room into deeper shadow. He lived during the purge of heterodox texts. The monk murmurs. They came for the manuscripts. For him. You swallow. The scholar stands, gathering scrolls with practiced speed. He tucks them into hidden slots beneath the table, into hollowed-out shelves, behind loose stones. He retrieves a tiny parchment from a stack, a single page containing lines of poetry, and hesitates before slipping it inside his robe. A poem? Of all the texts, he chose that. What was on it? You whisper. The monk's eyes soften. A verse written by his mentor. Words he believed worth saving even if all else burned. The footsteps grow louder. Dust shakes from the ceiling. The scholar grabs one last scroll, a long one wrapped in deep red cloth, and hides it beneath a loose floor tile. He replaces the tile with shaking fingers. Then he kneels. not in fear, but in readiness. The room shakes with the memory of soldiers rushing in, torches, boots, a harsh voice demanding to know what he hides. The scholar answers calmly, hands folded, a lie, but a gentle one, a lie meant to protect the fragile light of knowledge. The garrison leader overturns shelves. Scrolls fall. Some are taken, some trampled, some missed entirely. You feel heat in your throat. Anger, maybe, or awe. And afterwards, you whisper? The monk inhales. He survived. Barely. He recovered the hidden texts and continued his work. Through hunger, fear, and solitude. He steps toward the wall and presses on a stone. It shifts, revealing a hollow space. Inside it, the red scroll. Your breath catches. The monk lifts it reverently. This was his masterwork, the library beneath the floor. His true legacy. He offers it to you. The cloth is soft from age, warm from the room. When you unroll it gently, you find writing so delicate it looks like breath. Stories, maps, lessons, warnings, hopes, a tapestry of thought woven across decades. You read a line near the top. If truth is hidden, let it still breathe. Your fingers tremble slightly. When you blink, the scholar is gone. The shelves are whole again. The room stands silent, waiting. You roll the scroll back up and set it into the hollow where it belongs. The monk closes the stone. Knowledge survives, he says softly. You step back into the corridor. The hidden library fades behind you. But its warmth, its fierce, quiet defiance, remains alive in your mind like a lantern that refuses to die. And ahead, another hallway opens, dark, shimmering, and full of stories yet to unveil. The corridor exhaling out from the hidden library feels different, lighter, strangely luminous, as if your steps carry flecks of that secret knowledge with them. The warmth from the scholar's lantern still lingers beneath your ribs, glowing like a quiet ember. Even the air moves differently now, brushing softly against your hands, as if nudging you forward toward whatever waits next. The monk walks at your side with an expression you haven't quite seen on him before, anticipation, tinged with something like reverence. This way, he murmurs, guiding you down a hall that curves gently into darkness. The walls here are lined with old metal sconces. But instead of candles, each one holds a clay lamp with a thin wick trembling in oil. Their flames flicker low and long, stretching shadows into wavering silhouettes across the stone floor. You hear something before you see it. A rhythmic sound, soft, steady, almost like breathing. Then another sound, the faint hum of voices whispering in unison. Too quiet to decipher. Tonight, the monk says softly, you'll witness the night of burning lamps. You raise an eyebrow. Sounds either peaceful or terrifying. He gives a small smile. Both. The corridor opens into a large circular chamber with a ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stands a tall iron stand holding dozens, no, hundreds, of clay lamps. The flames gutter and sway, painting the chamber in gold and amber. The air smells of warm oil, smoke, and something faintly sweet, like dried herbs or old incense embedded in the stone. And gathered around the lamps are people. Not solid, not quite spectral, memories shaped into human forms. Monks, villagers, Travelers, all standing or kneeling, faces lit by orange glow, eyes lifted with expectation. You move closer, feeling the heat from the lamps brush against your cheeks. The whispers grow louder, not frantic, but reverent, like voices pressed between prayer and awe. The monk gestures toward a man at the front of the gathering, a saint whose presence radiates calm authority. He wears a simple robe, cinched with a cord frayed at the ends. His hair is tied back. Those strands escape and dance in the lamplight. His eyes shine with something deeper than mere reflection, conviction mixed with sorrow. This night, the monk says, was the night he foretold disaster. A shiver runs through you. The saint's gaze shifts toward the ceiling as though he sees something far beyond these dark stones. Was this connected to a real event? You whisper. The monk nods solemnly. A great fire, one that consumed half of the nearby city. You recall the historical accounts, fires sweeping through wooden rooftops, flames carried on dry winds, entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. A well-documented catastrophe, yet few records mention a saint predicting it. You watch as the saint steps forward, raises one hand, and murmurs to the assembly. His voice carries enough weight to still the whispers instantly. He told them, the monk says, that shadows had gathered over the city, that the lamps would reveal what the night tried to hide. You tilt your head. Cryptic much? Prophecy often is. The monk replies gently. The saint lifts a single lamp from the stand. Its flame dances erratically, as though agitated. He holds it high, and the chamber darkens, not because the other lamps dim, but because a shadow unfurls across the ceiling, long and trembling. You inhale sharply. The shadow forms the shape of a spreading mass, like smoke rolling across the sky. The people gasp. A woman covers her mouth. A young novice steps backward, trembling. The monk leans in. He believed this was a warning. The saint places the lamp atop a stone pedestal. Its flame stabilizes, but the shadow remains, stretching outward, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. He urged people to leave the city that night. The monk continues. Many listened, others dismissed him. You sigh softly. Let me guess, historians still debate whether he predicted the fire or got very lucky. The monk gives a sad smile. Indeed. The room flickers again. The memory reshapes itself. Suddenly, the chamber fills with urgency. People gather their belongings, whispering prayers of gratitude or fear. A man clutches his child's hand. Two women embrace tightly. A novice hurriedly snuffs out lamps, eyes wide. And then something else catches your attention, an obscure detail nearly hidden behind the crowd. On a small side shelf sits a stack of wax tablets. One of them is etched with lines forming a peculiar pattern, a swirling shape with branching arms. What's that? You ask, pointing. The monk moves closer, his map of wind paths through the city. He studied them for years. He believed the turning of night winds could reveal where danger might strike. You run a finger along the grooves. The pattern looks chaotic but intentional, a tangle of loops and lines that somehow still forms a coherent whole. Did it work? You whisper. The monk nods. The fire burned exactly where he marked the strongest wind channels. You exhale slowly. Okay, that's impressive. The saint approaches the shelf. picks up the tablet, and tucks it under his arm. Then he turns toward the gathering and gestures toward the exit. They follow. The room fades into memory dust. And suddenly you stand on a hillside overlooking the city. Below, rooftops stretch like patched leather. The sky glows faintly orange, not from the sun, but from the reflection of flames just beginning to rise. A faint breeze touches your face. It smells of heat, smoke, fear. The saint stands beside you, his lamp held at his chest. He watches the city with eyes full of grief, but also purpose. He stayed, the monk whispers. He refused to flee until every person who would listen had left. You feel emotion swell in your throat as you watch him descend the hill alone. Lamp steady in his grasp. Shadows ripple across the city like unfolding wings. Flames begin to lick the rooftops. People shout. Bells ring, not in harmony, but in frantic bursts. He saved many, the monk murmurs, but not all. You watch the saint vanish into the spreading blaze. His lamp a tiny star swallowed by orange haze. Then, like a held breath releasing, the scene dissolves. The hill disappears. The city fades. The flames cool into darkness. You stand once again inside the circular chamber. The lamps now extinguished, their smoke curling gently upward. The monk touches one of the cold lamps lightly. He believed warnings were a form of compassion. He says, "You nod slowly, and sometimes ignored." A quiet ache spreads through your chest. But the corridor beyond the chamber lights itself in a gentle glow, welcoming. Steady, warm enough to soften the sadness. Another story waits, calling softly from the shadows. The corridor that unfolds after the chamber of burning lamps feels colder. As though the memory of flames has drained all remaining warmth from the stone. The air brushes against your skin with a sharpness you haven't felt before, thin, crisp, tinged with the faint scent of salt and wind from places far beyond these walls. The monk walks beside you, his expression quieter, his robe trailing softly behind him like a shadow reluctant to leave the past. Not every saint lived within warm halls. He murmurs. Some were sent far from everything they knew. You follow him past a narrow archway and into a long hallway broken by small windows. Frost halos the edges of each one, forming crystalline feathers that shimmer faintly in the lantern light. The cold grows more insistent, pressing against your cheeks, sinking into your fingertips, whispering, "You might want a jacket." The monk stops at a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. He rests both palms on it, as though steadying himself. He crossed the frozen sea. The monk says, and the world nearly forgot him. The door swings open with a groan, slow, reluctant, like an old man stretching after too long in one position. You step through. The monastery dissolves around you. Suddenly you are standing on a vast expanse of pale blue ice stretching endlessly toward a gray horizon. Wind slices across your face like a sharpened ribbon. Snowflakes whirl in frantic spirals. Scraping at your cloak, the air tastes metallic, almost bitter. It's the kind of cold that could freeze even your Wi-Fi signal. A man trudges ahead of you. Wrapped in a heavy wool cloak patched in so many places it looks like a quilt sewn by someone with a vendetta against symmetry. He leans into the wind with stubborn determination. His breath fogs the air. His steps creak against the frozen surface. The monk appears beside you, not affected by the cold, of course. Because monks and memories are apparently built different. He was exiled, the monk says, for refusing to renounce his teachings. You watch the man adjust the rope tied around his waist. Attached to it is a small wooden sled carrying bundles wrapped in cloth. A handful of books, and a carved wooden cross. A travel inventory that screams, "Minimalist survivor, but make it spiritual." He stops suddenly and turns toward the horizon, squinting as though he expects the wind to carry answers. His face is raw from cold, but his eyes burn with quiet resilience. What happened to him? You ask softly, your breath barely visible in the icy air. The monk's voice lowers. He was sent to a settlement across the frozen sea during a known period of political exile. Many were banished, few survived. You feel your chest tighten. The historical records of that exile, harsh winters, broken communities, treacherous sea crossings, were always grim. But seeing it like this, through the eyes of someone walking alone across ice, makes the past feel painfully alive. The man kneels beside the sled, hands trembling from cold. He reaches into one bundle and withdraws something unexpected, a small lyre. Its strings are frayed, its wooden body cracked. Yet he holds it with reverence, brushing snow from its frame. He carried that with him everywhere. The monk says, a final gift from the people he served. You watch as the man plucks one string. The sound is faint, thin, brittle, but somehow beautiful in its fragility. The wind quiets for a moment, as though listening. He composed music during his exile. The monk continues, hymns of hope in a land where hope was scarce. Another gust of wind slams into you. Ice stings your face, needling your skin. You tug your cloak tighter. Suddenly very aware you're underdressed for medieval polar travel. The man presses onward. With each step, the ice changes, smooth in one moment, jagged in the next, forming ridges that look like frozen waves. A faint cracking sound echoes beneath your feet, and your stomach drops. Oh good, you whisper. Nothing like the sound of ice cracking under your only hope of survival. The monk chuckles softly. He trusted the sea. He believed the divine had marked a path for him. You glance down at the barely visible lines zigzagging across the ice, thin, glowing patterns that twist and turn like veins of light. Did he see those lines? You ask. Yes, the monk says. He believed they guided him. Was it real? A small smile. Historians still debate whether those patterns were natural formations, tricks of reflected light, or simply visions born of exhaustion. You roll your eyes gently. Historians debate everything. Indeed. Ahead, the man reaches a large crack, an open stretch of black water slicing through the ice like a wound. The wind howls around him. He kneels, touching the edge carefully, testing its strength. A small object slips from his cloak and lands on the ice, a carved figurine of a bird. You crouch, picking it up. Its wooden surface is smooth, shaped by many years of being held, thumbed, prayed over. That, the monk murmurs, was made by a child he once taught. A token of flight, freedom. He believed it reminded him to continue. You look up. The man retrieves the figurine, presses it to his forehead, then pockets it again. He studies the crack in the ice. glances toward the horizon, then, astonishingly, steps onto a narrow ledge formed by two slabs pressed together. It wobbles beneath him, your heart leaps into your throat. Somehow, he makes it across. Minutes, hours, who knows how long, you follow him across the endless frozen wasteland. Snow thickens, turning the horizon into a blank void. Wind wraps around you like a cold serpent. Your joints ache in sympathy. The man trudges forward, never stopping, never yielding. Finally, a faint glow appears in the distance, firelight from a settlement perched on the far edge of the frozen sea. Wooden huts, smoke rising from chimneys, figures moving near the shoreline. The man's steps quicken, his breath shudders, his eyes glisten, not with tears but with relief so deep it looks like prayer. He reached them, the monk says, against night, cold, and exile. You swallow, and then? The wind calms, snow falls gently, the scene begins to fade. He served them, the monk whispers. He taught, healed, listened. He brought warmth to a place colder than winter. The icy horizon dissolves into darkness. The wind vanishes. The crunch of frost melts into silence. You blink, and you are back in the monastery. The door behind you closes softly, as if sealing the icy world away. Your skin still tingles with phantom cold. The monk's expression is solemn but proud. He walked where no one else dared, and he left a path for others. You nod slowly, feeling the weight of it settle into your breath. The corridor ahead warms faintly, beckoning you forward. Another story waits, its truth hidden in soft shadows, ready to unfold. The faint warmth returning to the corridor feels almost unreal after the razor-cold winds of the frozen sea. You rub your arms unconsciously, as though trying to convince your body that the frost has truly released its grip. The candles lining the hall seem to sense your lingering chill, their flames stretch taller. Glow brighter, bathing the stone in a cozy amber that feels like a warm hand pressed gently to your back. The monk walks beside you again, quiet, steady, thoughtful. This one, he murmurs, is about something small, something overlooked, yet powerful in ways people rarely understood. You arch a brow, small like humble beginnings, or small like dangerously tiny but spiritually radioactive. He gives the faintest smile. You will see. The corridor narrows briefly before opening into a chamber unlike the others you visited. This one is dim, intimate, with shelves carved directly into the stone walls. Upon them sit relics, fragments of wood, bits of cloth, small metal objects, each housed in a simple clay bowl. No glass cases, no lavish displays, just quiet reverence. In the center of the room stands a pedestal draped in linen aged to the color of dried parchment. Atop it sits a small box carved from dark walnut wood. Smooth, plain, easily ignored. The monk gestures toward it. That is the relic nobody wanted. You blink, promising. He chuckles softly. It came from a saint whose life was full of service, but whose final possession was considered strange. You step closer to the box, feeling the subtle hum of something old, something quietly insistent. The lid bears a carved symbol, a spiral inside a circle. Not ornate, not precise, almost like it was carved by someone who wasn't used to tools. What's inside? You whisper. The monk places a hand over his heart. Open it. You lift the lid carefully, half expecting a flash of divine light or at least a dramatic gust of air. Instead, you find a stone. Small, pale, roughly oval, no shimmer, no inscriptions, no obvious significance. Just a stone. You blink. Okay, not what I expected. The monk laughs softly. Most people agreed with you. You tilt the stone in the lantern light. It is smooth on one side, rough on the other, with a single faint indentation. It looks like something you'd kick aside on a walk without noticing. When he died, the monk says, this was found in his robe. His followers believed it was a relic. He pauses. The council disagreed. You set the stone back in the box gently. So what was it? The monk leads you to a nearby wall, where a mural, faded, fractured, depicts the saint teaching children beneath a large tree. His hands are raised, expressive, joyful. The children laugh. Some reach toward the branches. Others chase each other in circles. He was beloved, the monk says. He cared for the poor, the sick, the forgotten. His deeds were many, but his relic troubled people. You tilt your head, because it was a rock? Yes, the monk says simply. He gestures toward another mural. This one shows the saint at a riverbank, handing a small oval stone to a child. The child's expression is bright, delighted, as though being handed treasure. He gave stones to children. The monk explains, not as toys, as symbols. Of what? He smiles. Patience. He taught that if you keep a stone in your pocket long enough, its weight will remind you of the virtue you seek, and that consistency, not intensity, shapes the soul. You blink, surprised. A pocket stone meditation, medieval wellness hack. Love it. The monk chuckles. He believed every child should have one, and many did. He picks up the relic stone again and turns it so you can see the faint indentation more clearly. An obscure detail, he murmurs, often forgotten. This indentation was made by his thumb, from holding it during prayer, every day, for decades. You swallow quietly. What once looked meaningless now suddenly feels heavy with devotion. Then why didn't anyone want it, you ask? Because, the monk says gently, relics were expected to be extraordinary. Bones, garments, objects tied to miracles. He pauses. A simple stone seemed unworthy. You sigh. He must have been disappointed. No, the monk replies. He was already gone. The disappointment belonged to those who misunderstood. You study the stone again, imagining it tucked into a simple robe pocket, warmed by years of touch, carried across fields, villages, and long nights of service. What happened to it, you ask? The monk leads you to a corner of the chamber where a row of clay tablets contains inscriptions, records of council debates, notes scribbled by scribes, fragmented accounts. This, he says, pointing to a line, is a council decree stating the relic was to be placed in storage, away from public view. That seems rude. The monk raises a brow. They were uncertain. Many believed it was not truly connected to him. Others feared it would confuse the faithful. And historians still debate whether they were right. You say. He smiles. Exactly. He places the stone back into the box and closes the lid gently. Years later, He continues, a group of travelers found comfort in this relic. They believed its simplicity held greater truth than any miracle. You imagine tired travelers sitting in this chamber, passing the stone from hand to hand, feeling its humble weight. Its quiet warmth, its reminder that faith sometimes grows from small, steady choices. Did it ever become popular, you ask? The monk shakes his head. No, and that is the beauty of it. It remained small, quiet, overlooked, just like the virtue he taught. You run your fingers along the edge of the box. The wood is warm, smooth from centuries of touch. A single spiral carved on top, the symbol of patience. Perhaps. Can I hold it again? You whisper. The monk opens the lid. You lift the stone one more time. It feels different now, almost alive, pulsing gently with the weight of the saint's years. It's warmer. Or maybe, you are. You tuck the warmth of it into your palm, holding it like a borrowed heartbeat. When you place the stone back in its box, you feel something settle inside you, a quietness, a grounding, a subtle shift like wet sand molding to your footsteps. The chamber fades slowly, its relics softening into shadow. The box closes with a whisper. The corridor beyond brightens, ready to carry you onward. Another story breathes in the dark, waiting for your steps. The corridor greets you with a warmer glow now, almost cheerful. If stone walls and medieval candles can be described as cheerful, after holding that tiny relic stone, you feel oddly grounded. Your steps land more softly. Your breathing feels slower, and even the darkness ahead looks less threatening, as if the monastery itself recognizes the shift inside you. The monk walks with a thoughtful calm beside you, hands folded loosely in his sleeves. You've seen grief, he murmurs. You've seen warning, and patience. Now, listen for joy again. Woven differently this time. A low hum reaches you before you even turn the next corner. Not a human hum, too airy, too layered, like wind moving through hollow reeds or the soft choral rise of distant voices restrained by stone. The corridor opens onto a wide staircase. At its top is a wooden door left slightly ajar, leaking warm light and the gentle murmur of melody. The monk nods toward it. Up there. You climb slowly, as though climbing into a dream. When you push the door open, you find yourself on the monastery roof. The night sky stretches above you, vast, deep blue, dusted with stars that shimmer like spilled salt across velvet. A faint breeze brushes your cheeks. You inhale cool air scented faintly with pine, wet stone, and the lingering ghost of incense from some distant service. And at the center of the rooftop, a group of monks stands in a circle, singing. Their voices rise together, low at first, blending into a resonant hum that vibrates faintly through your ribs. It's not like the solemn chants you might expect. This sound is warmer, almost playful, rippling like water under moonlight. You barely get a moment to absorb it before a new voice enters the harmony, strong, clear, startlingly beautiful. That, the monk whispers beside you, is him. A single figure steps forward from the circle, tall, thin, with a presence that feels both grounded and buoyant. His robe is simple, tied at the waist with a cord that dances in the wind. He tilts his head back, lifting his voice higher into the night until it threads through the air like silk. He wrote the hymn they're singing. The monk explains, a song that spread across borders during the coronation year. A well-known historical event flashes in your memory: the coronation of a young king whose rise marked a brief era of peace in the region. Chronicles mention celebrations, bells, feasts, processions, but rarely the mystical tune that became synonymous with that hopeful season. Until now. You close your eyes and let the melody wrap around you. Each note feels like light poured into sound, soft but powerful enough to loosen something tight beneath your ribs. He believed music was a prayer without walls. The monk says, a bridge between hearts. When you open your eyes again, you notice something unusual behind the singing figure: a long wooden tube resting against the parapet. It's curved slightly, carved with swirling patterns, and fitted with small holes along its length. "What's that?" you whisper. The monk smiles. "His flute." You raise an eyebrow. "Looks more like someone tried to make a wooden dragon and gave up halfway." "Perhaps," he concedes with a quiet laugh. "But it carried a sound unlike any other." The singing figure picks up the flute. He brings it to his lips, and the wind seems to hold its breath in anticipation. The first note that spills out is pure, bright, and full of longing, like a bird calling for dawn even though night is nowhere near finished. Your heart stutters. The melody curls around the rooftop like smoke from an unseen fire. It rises, dips, swirls, weaving through the voices of the monks. The entire roof feels alive, trembling faintly with harmony. You lean forward. "I've never heard anything like that." "He made it himself," the monk says, "from a branch of an ash tree struck by lightning." "Oh, casual craftsmanship." "He believed the wood held the voice of the storm," the monk explains, "and that if he carved it gently enough, the storm would sing through him." You shake your head in wonder. "And did it?" The monk's smile widens. "Historians still debate that part." "Of course they do." The singing saint lowers the flute and joins the chorus again, his voice blending seamlessly with the others. The monks sway slightly, moving with the rhythm of the night. The sky above seems to respond, stars pulsing brighter, clouds drifting aside as if giving the music room to breathe. Something catches your eye on the rooftop stones, tiny carved markings arranged in rows. When you crouch to examine them, you realize they're musical notations. Crude but intentional, dozens of them. He wrote his melodies on the roof. The monk says, he said the sky was the best audience because it didn't interrupt. You grin, relatable. A breeze lifts the hem of your cloak and brushes your hair from your face. You stand again, turning your gaze toward the parapet. From here, you can see the world below, the soft glow of lanterns in the distant town. The silver ribbon of the river winding through fields. The faint shimmer of dew settling into the grass. The singing grows louder, richer, layered with the voices of the entire community. The saint steps forward, raising both hands to guide the final crescendo. His smile is easy, open, radiant in a way that could warm even the bitterest winter night. This hymn, the monk murmurs, became a symbol of unity. It crossed kingdoms. Even soldiers sang it on the march. You swallow, and people say music isn't powerful. Oh, the monk says softly, they knew it was. You watch the saint lower his hands. The music softens, drifting into a gentle hush. The monks bow their heads. The wind carries the final notes across the rooftop, scattering them into the fields like seeds. An obscure detail emerges as you glance toward the edge of the roof, a small clay cup, half filled with something pale and granular. "What's that?" you ask. The monk steps closer and lifts it. "Salt," he says. He sprinkled it on the parapet before singing. A ritual of protection, old and nearly forgotten. Protection? From what? From losing his voice. The monk says gently. It was a superstition from his homeland. You blink. Singers have been terrified of losing their voice since forever. Huh? Apparently. He sets the cup down again. As the monks disperse slowly, the singing saint looks toward you, as though he can sense the living listener among these memory shadows. His smile is gentle, knowing. He bows his head once. A gesture of acknowledgement, then he fades, dissolving into starlight and wind. The rooftop dims, though the stars shine brighter for a moment, as if lingering in farewell. The monk turns toward the staircase. "There is more," he whispers. You follow him downward as the music lingers in your ears, soft, steady, glowing from within like a flame shielded by cupped hands. Another story waits for you in the shadows below. Your ears still hum with the echo of rooftop hymns as you follow the monk down a narrow stairwell. The melody lingers somewhere behind your ribs, like a warm ember that refuses to dim. Even the air around you seems to remember it, the faintest tremble in the stones. As if the monastery itself once learned to sing. The monk reaches the bottom step and pauses. "We descend now into older ground," he murmurs. "Paths many pilgrims walked, and many forgot. The corridor that opens before you feels different from the others. The stone is darker, more worn, as though countless feet smoothed its surface into a long, quiet sigh. The walls hold faint etchings, symbols half erased by time. Lines that hint at journeys taken centuries before this night. A faint, dusty wind drifts past your ankles, carrying the scent of old soil and crushed dried leaves. This, the monk says softly, is the path of the ancient pilgrims. You follow him through a low archway. Immediately the ceiling rises, the walls widening out to form a tunnel broad enough for a procession. Faded murals cling to the stone, barely visible figures walking beneath stars. Carrying staffs, leading animals, praying beside mountain paths. Your footsteps feel strangely heavier here. Like the ground remembers every traveler who crossed it. Like it's measuring yours. A soft glow begins to form ahead. Warm, flickering, a golden thread woven through the gloom. Someone waits, the monk whispers. When you round a bend, you see him. A saint, lean, weather-worn, wrapped in a traveler's cloak that has somehow survived centuries of wind and dust. His face is lined deeply, as though every road he walked carved a quiet truth into him. He stands beside a stone pillar, one hand resting on its surface, the other gripping a wooden staff polished smooth from use. Beside him sits a leather satchel filled with small objects, bottles, scraps of parchment, a piece of rope, and something that looks suspiciously like a dried apricot. He was a guide, the monk murmurs, one who walked the pilgrim routes long before they were mapped. The saint doesn't speak. Instead, he taps the pillar lightly with his staff. Dust falls away, revealing old carvings beneath, a map. "Well," The medieval equivalent of a map, an arrangement of lines and circles. Mountains sketched as triangles, rivers as wavering slashes, but what makes you blink is a small spiral etched near one corner. That spiral, you whisper, looks familiar. The monk nods. He marked every place he believed held safe water sources. Springs, wells, basins carved naturally by stone. Useful, you murmur. Invaluable, the monk corrects, especially during the pilgrimage years when drought struck the region. A known historical event surfaces, the chronicled drought that lasted 4 summers. Drying rivers, straining towns, and turning pilgrimages into dangerous feats of endurance. He walked ahead of caravans. The monk explains, checking each spring. He sometimes traveled days without sleep, leaving small markers made of twigs and stones to guide the ones who followed. You step closer to the pillar and run a finger over the map. The stone is cool, rough, ancient. Your touch stirs something. Suddenly the walls around you shift. The tunnel dissolves. You stand beneath an open sky. Dawn barely breaking over a vast plain. The saint walks ahead, staff tapping the ground with steady rhythm. Pilgrims follow behind him, families. The old, the young, a few carrying what little food they have. Their faces are tired but hopeful. Dust rises around their feet. Birds circle overhead. Far off, you hear the call of a shepherd tending his flock. The saint stops at a ridge and lifts his staff. The pilgrims gather around him. He sensed water here. The monk whispers beside you. The saint kneels and brushes aside stones. Beneath them, soil darkens, moisture. A small cry of relief rises from the pilgrims. They dig, forming a shallow basin. Water collects, clear, cool, miraculous in its simplicity. He saved many lives, the monk says. You exhale slowly. But then something catches your eye, an obscure detail on the saint's staff. A notch carved near the top. Small enough to miss unless you're looking for it. You tilt your head. What's that mark? You ask. The monk smiles softly. He measured shadows. You blink. Come again? He used the staff as a primitive sundial. The monk explains, to track not only time, but direction. The notch marked the midday shadow of a particular season. That's surprisingly scientific. Yes, the monk murmurs, but his writings suggest he learned it from desert tribes he once traveled with. And historians still debate whether he actually mastered the method. You say automatically. The monk chuckles. Of course. The scene shifts again. Years pass in a blur. Pilgrims come and go. Seasons change. Drought deepens. The saint grows older, slower, but never stops guiding. His cloak frays. His staff wears down, yet he walks, unwavering, gentle, watchful. One evening, he leads a small group across a barren stretch of land. No clouds, no wind, just heat rising from cracked soil. A young man stumbles. The saint kneels beside him, offering the last sip of his own water. His hands tremble, weary from decades of care. Yet his eyes remain warm. He gave more than he kept. The monk whispers. Then comes the moment, quiet, almost invisible, when the saint stops walking. He leans on his staff. Breath shallow. Gaze fixed on the horizon as though searching for a path beyond this world. Pilgrims gather around him. A woman weeps. A child clings to his cloak. The saint raises one hand and touches the carved notch on his staff. Tracing it gently. He believed, the monk murmurs, that shadows pointed the soul toward home. The scene dims. The planes fade. You stand once again in the ancient corridor. The pillar map before you glows faintly in the lantern light. The saint looks at you now, truly looks, his eyes holding an entire lifetime of dusty roads. Shimmering heat, worn sandals, and small mercies given freely. He lifts his staff one last time, tapping the stone gently. A message. You lean closer. At the base of the pillar, where dust had concealed it, is another carving, a small footprint. Simple, childlike. He walked, the monk says softly, so others could follow. The saint begins to fade, turning to dust and sunbeam. His staff dissolves, leaving only the faint scent of dry earth. The monk rests a hand on your shoulder. Every journey changes both the guide and the traveler. Your breath comes slow and deep. The corridor ahead waits, lit by soft golden hues. You feel both heavier and lighter, rooted and drifting. Another story calls from the shadows, quiet, patient, ready. The corridor ahead narrows again, funneling you gently toward a deeper quiet, one different from the hush of the silent monk or the cold of the frozen sea. This quiet carries a hum beneath it, a low vibration like the prelude to argument, or the moment before a storm chooses a direction. You rub your thumb across your palm without realizing why until the monk at your side speaks softly. The next one was not gentle, but necessary. You swallow. Necessary usually means someone made powerful people very uncomfortable. The monk doesn't deny it. He continues forward until the corridor opens into a vast hall with a high, arched ceiling. Tall windows line the walls, their stained glass fractured in places, allowing thin, cold beams of moonlight to spill across the floor. At the far end of the hall stands a long table flanked by stern-faced figures, counselors, nobles, clerics, spectral shapes rendered in faint gold light. Their expressions are tight, their hands clenched around scrolls and staffs. They wear layers of authority like armor. And standing alone on the opposite side of the table is him. A saint with shoulders squared, posture steady, eyes bright with a mix of patience and unshakable spine. His robe is simple, his sandals worn, but the air around him hums with a quiet fearlessness you can feel even from where you stand. He challenged a king, the monk murmurs. Your eyebrows rise. That's bold. Yes, the monk says, and dangerous. You step forward slowly, trying not to disturb the echo of that ancient tension filling the hall. The air tastes metallic, charged, the way it feels before lightning breaks open the sky. The king sits near the center of the council table, not adorned in jewels or golden robes, but unmistakably sovereign. His posture is stiff, his fingers drum lightly on the table. His crown, thin and austere, glints faintly under the moonlight. A well-known historical event immediately comes to mind. The dramatic council dispute between a monarch and a religious faction that nearly spiraled into open revolt. The chronicles record the political strategy, the alliances, the fallout, but rarely the man who stood alone at the center of it. The saint bows to no one, not disrespectfully, just honestly. like someone who knows his place is neither above nor below anyone else. The king speaks first. His voice echoes sharply. You can't hear the exact words, but the tone is unmistakably defensive. The saint replies with a calmness that reads almost as defiance. But not quite. He gestures gently, as though coaxing reason from the air. He questioned. The monk says quietly, why the people suffered while the court feasted. You exhale. Yep, that'll do it. The king lifts a hand sharply. The room crackles. Several counselors lean forward, their robes rustling like irritated birds. One slams a scroll down, parchment snapping loud as a whip. But the saint doesn't flinch. He simply steps closer. Just one step, but somehow that single movement rearranges the entire power dynamic. His presence feels clearer, sharper, larger, as if conviction itself deepens the space around him. He accused the court, the monk continues, of forgetting mercy. You glance at the king. His jaw tightens. His knuckles whiten over the arm of his chair. If pride had a color, it would be glowing behind his eyes right now. But what made him brave, the monk adds, was that he did not accuse to shame. He accused to heal. Another counselor rises abruptly, robes swishing. He waves a document in the air, pointing toward the saint with fury. You instinctively step back, because even in memory, an angry administrator is a universal threat. But the saint raises a hand, palm open, peaceful. The anger deflates, though not fully. Behind you, a cold breeze carries the whisper of the crowd gathered outside the hall. People waited that night, hundreds of them, hoping someone would speak truth on their behalf. A faint murmuring seeps through the walls like waves against a shore. The saint reaches into his robe and retrieves a small object, a pouch. He loosens its cord and pours something onto the table, grain. Just a few kernels, pale and trembling in the moonlight. The king frowns. You lean in. Grain? The monk nods. He showed the king the last handful of flour from a village nearly starved by taxes. Your breath catches. The saint gestures to the grain, such a small, pitiful amount, before lifting his gaze to the king. His expression softens, not accusing, not scathing, just honest, and deeply, heartbreakingly sad. This moment, the monk whispers, was recorded in only one chronicle. Why only one, you ask? The monk sighs, because the others found it inconvenient. You wince. The king looks at the grain, and something in his expression fractures, barely visible, but real. His shoulders sink, his posture falters. Power itself hesitates. But a counselor beside him leans in, whispering sharply, words edged with warning or manipulation or both. The king's face hardens again. Yet the saint doesn't let the moment die. He steps forward once more. And he laughs. Softly, almost kindly. The laugh rolls through the hall like a breeze nudging embers. He laughed? You whisper. Yes, the monk says. He had a way of dissolving tension with unexpected gentleness. You feel the echo of it, warm, surprising. Even the king seems taken aback, blinking as though he's forgotten how to process humor during conflict. The saint then says something you can't hear but can feel by the way the room shifts. A suggestion, a possibility, A compromise that rethreads dignity with mercy. Whatever he says, the hall quiets. The king leans back slowly. His hands relax. One of the counselors lowers his scroll. He offered a solution. The monk murmurs. A redistribution of grain reserves. Overseen not by the court, but by the villages themselves. Your eyebrows rise. Radical. And wise. The king is silent for a long moment. Then he nods. Barely. But he nods. A wave of relief washes through the hall, soft murmurs. Inspoken gratitude. Quiet awe. You feel it in your own ribs. The saint bows once, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of a shared humanity, and steps back. And there, almost hidden behind a pillar, you notice an obscure detail. A small wooden medallion hanging from the saint's belt. Carved with the simplest possible symbol, a circle broken by a single line. What does that mean, you ask? The monk smiles. It was his emblem, a circle opened to remind him that power must remain incomplete, so mercy has room to enter. You swallow gently. Then the hall dissolves. The council fades into dust. The king's silhouette shatters like glass. The saint's warm laughter lingers a moment longer, soft, comforting, defiant, before melting into silence. You find yourself back in the corridor, heart still thrumming with that delicate mix of courage and humility. The monk walks forward, and you follow, breath soft, steps steady. 2 stories remain, and the shadows ahead prepare to unfold them. The corridor after the council hall feels strangely weightless, as though the tension you walked through has been shaken loose and now drifts behind you like dust dancing in sunlight. The air cools, then warms, then cools again, as if the monastery itself is adjusting its breath to match yours. The candles flicker softly in their sconces, casting long ripples of shadow across the stone floor, shadows that sway like living ink. The monk walks quietly beside you. His smile is small but warm, the kind given by someone who's witnessed courage so many times that it still moves him. You've seen what a voice can do, he murmurs. Now, see what silence can reveal. You raise an eyebrow. Another silent monk? No, he says, chuckling softly. This one saw what others missed. Because the world rushed, and he watched. The corridor opens into a long, narrow hall. At first glance, it looks empty, ordinary. Stone walls, arched ceiling, daylight filtering through small windows near the top. But as you step forward, a feeling presses gently against your chest, anticipation mixed with something electric. Like walking into the calm between thunder and echo. Then you see it. A shadow moves at the far end of the hall, not fast. Not threatening, but precise, purposeful. A figure steps out from behind a column, carrying a lantern shaped like a bronze sphere with thin slits cut into its surface. The light escapes in narrow beams that stripe the walls in moving gold. A saint walks toward you. He is older than most you've met, hair silver, palm calloused, steps slow but certain. A robe hangs loose around him, tied with a rope decorated with tiny knotted beads. His gaze is steady, unblinking, like someone who has spent a lifetime looking not at people, but into them. He was the watcher, the monk whispers, a man who witnessed a miracle, or something very close to one. You feel the hall shift around you. Dust motes spiral upward. The shadows lengthen and gather near the walls, thickening into forms, vague figures that whisper without sound. The saint lifts his lantern. Its thin beams stretch across the hall like golden threads. And then something happens. The shadows twist. They shimmer. They move together as though pulled by an invisible tide toward a single point. You hold your breath as the beams of light converge into the shape of a dark, wavering arc on the far wall. A curved line. Then another. Then a third. And the arc begins to shift, lengthen, stretch, until it forms the unmistakable silhouette of a human figure raising an arm. You step back involuntarily. Okay, that's eerie. The monk nods. This was the miracle of shadows. A recorded event, rare, controversial, debated endlessly in dusty academic halls. Chronicles describe a night when lanterns behaved strangely across several monasteries, casting moving shadows unconnected to any physical form. Witnesses wept, skeptics questioned, artists drew frantically trying to capture the shapes. To see it, even as memory, makes your skin prickle. The saint moves the lantern slightly, and the shadow figure shifts with it, lifting both arms now. Its outline shimmering like heat distortion on stone. Then, slowly, it folds its hands together as though in prayer. Your chest tightens. You whisper, "Was that supposed to represent?" "We do not know," the monk says softly. Some believed it was an angelic sign. Others believed it was simply a trick of geometry. And historians still debate it. You guess. Ah, he smiles. Forever. The saint lowers his lantern, and the shadow dissolves immediately, falling back into the hall like spilled ink returning to its bottle. He walks past you, lantern in hand, stopping beside a pillar where a faint symbol is carved into the stone, a crescent shape intersecting a circle. You touch it and feel the shallow grooves. That symbol, the monk says, was his mark. He placed it anywhere he saw more than others did. On walls, on manuscripts, on scraps of parchment. What does it mean, you ask? The monk pauses, thoughtful. He never explained. Some think it represents the phases of understanding, light and dark sharing space equally. You feel a soft warmth settle under your ribs. The saint kneels now, placing the lantern on the floor. He opens a small leather pouch and removes several objects, flat stones marked with lines. A dried reed pen, a small wooden disc with holes drilled through it in neat patterns. An obscure artifact. What's that disc? You murmur. A device he invented, the monk says. It helped him track the angles of lantern light. Primitive, brilliant. Like an early protractor? Perhaps. He called it the night compass. You lift it gently. It's surprisingly light. The drilled holes align with tiny symbols etched near the rim, triangles, circles, strokes. He designed it after studying temple lamps in 3 different cities. The monk explains. He believed shadows could reveal things hidden from direct sight. Like what? He smiles. Truth. You run your thumb along the disc as the saint gently arranges the stones on the floor in a circle. With each placement, the shadows shift, thickening, narrowing, stretching across the room like curious animals. Then comes the moment that stops the breath in your throat. The shadows rise again. This time not forming a figure, but a wing. A single, vast, curved wing stretching across the length of the wall. Feathers rippling with the movement of unseen wind. Light fractures through the lantern slits. Catching on the stone, the shadow wing shivers, lifts, lowers. You whisper, "Is that?" "I do not know," the monk says. His voice is barely a breath. He claimed it came to comfort him after a period of deep despair. Your eyes sting unexpectedly. You swallow. The saint lifts the lantern again, and the wing dissolves into swirling darkness. When he lowers his head, light pools softly around him, giving him an almost childlike fragility. A memory rises without warning, a night you sat alone in the dark, waiting for something, anything, to remind you that the world could be kind again. The monastery feels that memory, holds it gently, wraps it in quiet understanding. The saint stands. He looks at you. He doesn't speak, but the silence around him thickens with meaning. You feel something settle in your chest, a sense that shadows are not always to be feared, that they sometimes reveal what light hides. The monk places a hand lightly between your shoulder blades. He believed shadows prove we stand in the presence of light. You close your eyes for a moment. The words linger like warm breath against your ear. When you open them again, the hall has faded, the saint is gone, the lantern remains only as a soft glow in your memory. You step back into the corridor. The air feels warmer, calmer, touched with something quietly sacred. Ahead, the darkness opens into a deeper gold. One last story waits. One final truth ready to rise. The corridor ahead glows faintly, as if each stone remembers every step you've taken and decides, finally, that you've earned a softer welcome. The air is warmer here, touched with a quiet honey gold warmth. You inhale slowly, and the scent surprises you. Beeswax, old wood, and something floral, drifting like the memory of a forgotten garden. The monk at your side pauses before a tall wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Unlike the others in this monastery, this door has no carvings, no symbols, no whisper of what lies behind it. It feels final, a threshold. He turns to you, his voice barely above breath. This is where the relics rest. All of them. You swallow, feeling a subtle tremor ripple through your chest, not fear, not anticipation, but that deep, familiar ache of approaching something sacred. When you open the door, the world shifts. You enter a wide chamber bathed in twilight. Not night, not day, just that quiet, glowing in between light that softens every edge. Shelves line the stone walls, each holding relics wrapped in linen or resting in carved boxes. Clay lamps burn low, dust floats like drifting fireflies. At the center of the room, a great stone table covered in relics, some humble, some curious, some cracked with age. And standing beside it is the last saint. He is older than any figure you've met so far, hair white as early frost. Hands lined deeply, posture slightly bent, but his eyes shine with warm intelligence, sharp curiosity, and a kindness that feels almost too big for the room. He tended the relics, the monk whispers, but he was more than a keeper. He was a witness, to lives, to loss, to grace. You step toward the table. The saint smiles gently and gestures to a relic near the corner, a broken bowl. Its edges are rough, Its glaze long faded. It doesn't look extraordinary. An obscure detail, the monk murmurs, is that this bowl belonged to a woman who risked everything to feed strangers during a siege. A known historical event flickers in your mind, an infamous siege that starved an entire city into desperation. Chronicles describe rationing, fire, broken supply routes. Yet here is the quiet truth beneath it. A broken bowl used by someone too small for history books but large enough in compassion to be remembered by saints. The saint touches the bowl with reverent fingertips. He moves to the next object, a fragment of a wooden beam. Charred at one end. Your breath catches, recognizing the connection. From the great fire? Yes, the monk whispers. Found weeks later, a reminder that destruction can reveal what endurance preserves. You walk around the table, tracing the shapes of relics with your eyes. A cracked bell, a staff carved with spirals, a wooden spoon stained with years of cooking, a single feather from the wanderer's cloak, the silent monk's reed brush, a pilgrim's tiny footprint carved into stone. All the stories you walked through are here, woven, preserved, waiting. The saint watches you with a patient expression, as if inviting you to see not objects, but threads. All these lives, intertwined, all these small acts, louder than history ever knew how to write them. You stop at a final relic, a small glass bead, cloudy with time. You pick it up. It warms instantly in your hand. What is this? You whisper. The monk's smile widens. No one knows. Truly, it was found among the earliest relics. Some say it belonged to a child. Some say it was part of a shattered lamp. Some believe it was simply a mistake, an object kept that was never sacred at all. And historians still debate it. You say, of course. The saint, still smiling, lifts a clay lamp and holds it toward you. The flame inside flickers, growing brighter with every step you take. The chamber seems to inhale with you, a soft, tender breath. You've walked long, the monk murmurs beside you. And you've seen much. You look back at him. Is this the end? You ask. No, he says gently. Just the place where stories rest. And where you carry them forward. The saint sets the clay lamp into your hands. Its warmth seeps into your skin, filling you with a quiet steadiness, like the echo of a heartbeat not your own. You close your eyes. The monastery fades in soft spirals of gold and shadow. The saint's presence melts into the background. The monk's final words wrap themselves around you like a blanket. And then, slowly, the outro begins. End of script. Sweet dreams.